Welcome back to Season 9 of the SMITE Pro League. We have got one more best of 3 set for you here today as our second set of the day. And just the number 2 gets the wheels turning. Like the number 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19. And another thing to add on this list is you at home can be a member of this very prestigious list. And it's things that are prime. You at home can be prime, just like all of the numbers I just listed, and so many more numbers after that. Don't miss your opportunity to join this very prestigious club, because not only are you a part of this great numbers club, you're a part of the Prime Club as well, where you get free delivery, free in-game content, free games every single month, and free Twitch subs to your favorite Twitch channels. So thanks to Prime, not only for being one of the best list of numbers there is, but for being one of the best sponsors there is and being with us here in Season 9 of the SMITE Pro League. My name is Dolson. Trelly, who is also Prime, standing by with me now. Not standing by, sitting by with me for the on my scale of ad reads. Where do you put that one?
That was so good.
Was that Prime?
Yeah, I realized once you said 7, and then I was like 11. I was like, oh, he's doing it. He's gonna say it. And I got so excited.
Say Prime.
I was like, how many Prime numbers does he know? And you knew most of them.
I could keep going.
Of course.
I definitely don't have them written down right in front of me. That's definitely not what's happening. Another Prime thing is the matchup we've got up next, and also just the weekend we've got in general here in the SPL. Some fantastic matches still to be had. Remember, this is the final weekend of Phase 2, so these are the last matches we've got. Standings will be set after this, and then Masters in just a couple of weeks. So, Olympus Bolts versus Tartarus Titans, that rounds out a awesome day number 1 here. And then the Jade Dragons, Trelly, I think that's the big storyline here. We have got Jade Dragons tomorrow against the Scarabs, the matchup of the new junglers, and then Jade Dragons again on Sunday against the Titans. And so down the stretch, you look at all the great matchups that we've got, standings coming into play for sure. We have not had any wide gaps built up between squads throughout the majority of Season 9 here so far. All of the top teams have been taking games off one another's. Camelot Kings in first, but this is a very important matchup for the Bolts because the Bolts play the Kings later on this weekend. Really indicative, though, standings-wise, of a very, very competitive phase.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the Jade Dragons just jumped up 2 spots on that matchup alone. Now the Titans have an option to really throw a wrench in the Bolts' shots of ever trying to climb to that number 1, just because of the fact that the Camelot Kings face them later on, as you mentioned. So if the Bolts win here and then take them down, that could throw some interesting shots at the standings. So, I mean, just such a competitive league, and obviously from from 6 up, it could really go anywhere at this point, and that's just goes to show, I mean, how great of these matchups are, really. Agree.
Look, the Tartarus Titans have been playing a lot better SMITE, because remember, the 7 and 5 wasn't as attractive as it now is earlier on in the phase. This was a team that took some time to get going here in this phase. Even in 2 or 3, 4 weeks ago, hadn't established that consistency that maybe Titans fans were expecting. A team that always shows up during the tournament events.
Oh yeah.
Been doing a lot of theory crafting, to be fair to them, to be fair to the Titans. Lots of mindset changes for this team, strategy changes, team comp changes, and a lot of that is funneled through the solo lane. SOT has been one of the most flexible solo laners that we have seen in the league this year. He is playing the ADCs. He is playing the tankier style mages. He's playing Atlas every once in a while, and SOT has totally changed the dynamic of the solo lane, it feels like, not only for his team, but for the rest of the league.
Yeah, it's just a nightmare to try and draft against as well, because you never know, are you facing an Olorun? Are you facing a full damage Cabrakan? Are you facing just a normal style of solo laner? I imagine most of his opponents have no idea. So it's just one of those things where it's very difficult to go into, but SOT has shown, that he can play just about anything in that solo lane, and he can still do his job tremendously well. Definitely a driving force of this squad. But you're right to highlight the fact that it wasn't always like this. They come off of that Masters win, and then they sort of fell by the wayside for quite some time. They really weren't getting their feet up under them. We expected them to come out swinging a little bit more, but maybe just off of that post-Masters hiatus where they were just like, we won, we can dial it back a little bit. Interesting style of team comp. CycloneSpin was playing those warriors in the duo lane.
Right.
And now that they've been back to their more traditional style of drafts, they've been winning pretty consistently.
They have been, and some of the strategy for SOT has stuck. Remember, played some Thor, Atlas, Cabrakan, Olorun, King Arthur, Cerberus, 6 different picks in the last 6 games for SOT. and the Titans have looked better for it. We've also seen Paul start to dial things up in the mid lane. Has only died 3 times in the last 6 games, so a lot of zeros. At most has died once in the last 6 games. The Titans playing around their roles so effectively. Got a tough matchup, though. You're going up against a mid lane here in the Bolts that's wearing the purple crown this week, the MV Primer, Venenu, off a fantastic performance last week. Remember, he played some more unique picks in their set up against the Oni Warriors. Played Chiron, went 13-3. Played Apwash, went 7-2. And so Ven, his performance in that one set alone, worthy of the MVP crown, but really his play so far this phase has been impressive.
Yeah, I guess the fans at home really enjoyed seeing the Alpwash game.
Did you, Charlie?
I was not the biggest fan of the lock-in, but the performance on field, yeah. I mean, it looked great. That's the thing. It was one of those situations where it was in a good matchup. You're up against a lot of healers, so you can find that situation, and the snipes were on point that whole set. Ven was on fire, so I think very deserving of the crown as we get some funky music. As
I like this.
Yeah, this is a good time.
What a good replay reel. I'm digging it. Look, Ven had enough kills in this one Chiron game against the Oni Warriors to make an entire highlight reel through. You know, you could have watched back that game. All of the plays felt like highlights.
we might get to.
Honestly, we might get to. 13, 3, and 8 for Ven in this specific game that you're watching here. And again, the Oni Warriors, a team that we're starting to roll just a bit. Now the Oni Warriors have fallen a couple of sets in a row. But I really think this speaks to the flexibility of Venenu as well, because Ven, not a player who has played a lot of the same picks in a row. Chiron, Apwash, AMC, Merlin, Morrigan, ESET, 6 different picks in the last 6 games for Ven as well. And so 2.21 KDA, the most valuable primer in Week 7. That's what the Titans got to stare down.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be spooky, given the fact that Paul has a similar god pool, but also can just Paul can hard carry on like 6 different mid lane picks. And this is what I was talking about last week. Just it's got to be a nightmare to go up against that in the mid lane. But when you have someone like Ven, who is also very eclectic and also go to a different style of picks as well, I imagine there's a little bit of crossover there. The E-sets, for example, things that could be contested. The Hell as well. You got to think those type of things are on the minds of both of these teams going into a matchup like this, because they would both love an MVP performance out of their mid laners, right?
Of course. And look, both teams have been playing with the flexible compositions in mind. How do these teams game plan against the opposing squad? What do you look at in the opposing team to try to find yourself an advantage? We'll jump down to an interview now and hear their thoughts.
Last year we had a pretty good phase 2, and this year we got around the same performance. We've only lost like 2 games so far, and I thought like we had a really good chance of winning both of them. So like I'm pretty satisfied with our performance, but like we lost. We obviously could have done better. So I'd like give us like a 4.
Probably like a 3, because we've definitely been like not playing so good at some points, but we've been playing like decent at other points. I wouldn't say like 5 or like a 1. I don't know. I think 3 is pretty fair.
I mean, I think we've been doing pretty good. Like we usually at like lands and like important events, like we haven't won one yet. So I don't know. We just gotta like prep harder, or like I don't know, just play better, and hopefully it works out.
Last minute fixes for Masters, I would say concentrate a bit more. Settle down on the trolling a bit. Get a little bit more focused, and just start playing really good.
The Tartarus Titans, they usually they're like the show up at lanners and like not try that hard during like phasers. Yeah, I mean they've had like their score, they're like towards like the bottom, I think. Yeah, that's like usually what the trend seems to be with them. Last time we played them, they played Bellona ADC, and that was that's really interesting to play against. Yeah, I'm sure they'll do good this next Masters thing though.
I'd probably say a 4 out of 5 because they're 2nd seed, so they've done the 2nd best, but they're not 1st, so they don't get the 5 stars.
The biggest hurdle, I don't know, I think if they like Paul gets his like gods and like Layers gets his gods, and then they should have a couple gods that they do really good on, and usually they're a pretty good like late game fighting team, so if they can like drag it out to like 30-40 minutes, they're pretty good at stopping you from like doing Fire Giant and just being like really annoying.
I know, we just gotta stop trolling, bro. That's what I think, man. Like if we just relax, man. We don't run it down, bro. We got a good shot at winning, man.
Seems to be a very distinct mindset from Paul.
For sure.
Yeah, and you know what? To be fair, I think Paul puts into words a lot of what we've said, but in more certain terms, according to Paul. A team that knows that they have a successful squad built, the ability to go deep into these tournaments, get more creative, in our words, during the phases, but will always find their way to the tournaments. They're never at risk of not making any of these LAN events. And so, now the key is winding down, right? You got to wind down the creativity a bit, Trelly. You got to wind up the seriousness a bit. Now is the time, prior to Masters, for the Titans to be doing that. I think they have done so. Now, we do have to talk about one more thing.
Lay it on me.
The last time the previous week's MVP won a set, right? Just won a set, was when LASBRA won MVP like 6 weeks ago, something like 7 weeks ago maybe. And so there's been a bit of a streak where the MVP of the previous week has been unsuccessful in winning any sets the next week. So you're battling against a bit of history here if you're Ven. And what a team to try to break that streak against in the Tartarus Titans. Plenty of storylines to be had going into game number 1, and P's and B's for game number 1 around the corner. Now, I think we talked a bit about it, Trilly. Very dynamic in these picks and pans. Could go anywhere. Could see SOT on many different things. Ven, LASBRA, Paul, all of them could be very dynamic with their pick selection.
Yeah, I would say so. And given the fact that we got to hear Jake's thoughts, I can't imagine the picks like the E set, for example, are ever going to get through. The Bolts never a team that really enjoy facing that. Layers was also a point of contention, so taking away that Osiris going to be a great option. So it looks like both of these teams, as you would expect, did their homework and are not wanting to let these scary picks get through. Awesome. Jake Xingchen, a pick that is also pretty feared amongst the league. I think you're right to highlight the solo lane, though. I'm interested to see if the Bolts put any sort of fear against that Ullr in the solo lane for SOT, or if they just... Wow, the Titans actually banned Soul. I had to stop my words.
Interesting.
Right? I mean, BaRRaCCuDDa, one of the highlight Soul players, no doubt, but this pick hasn't been too insane for teams to deal with. The win rate's not looking that great, so the Titans just don't want that amount of safety in the duo lane, it seems.
Soul has been played once in the last 6 by BaRRa, and it went a whopping 1-1-1 up against the Oni Warriors in that loss. But suppose threatening enough that the Bolts, or the Titans rather, will take it away. Chernobog left open, ends up being first pick here. Now there is some flexibility. There had been much more flexibility with Chernobog in the past, or it could be solo, it could be mid, could be ADC. Feels like we haven't seen it solo in a little bit. Mid ADC, maybe more leaning nowadays. Still keeps the door open to some flexibility. But when you're talking about SOT, you always got to keep that opportunity open.
Yeah, no doubt. Notably, that Cupid pick is still available. I mean, BaRRa doesn't scream to me the Cupid's his favorite pick. He usually has his gods and sticks to them. But Cupid's in the meta right now for a good reason and has a great time up into that Chernobog. So got to keep your eyes open for that if that's something the Bolts are looking for. The Chiron also in the mid lane. There's a few different options the Bolts could go to. ADC-wise, specifically, if you're looking for a hunter this early on in the draft, you really aren't forced into picking that because of the fact that the Titans have 2 picks that they have to go for before they can ban anything away, and they already have the Chernobog, so maybe the Bolts just hold on to that, and it looks like that is the plan. They'll grab the Cabrakan. We've seen it played in support, but more often than not, we've seen it played in solo lane with SOT and Haddix both liking this pick, as we actually get to see our first Lancelot lock in the Pro League.
Yeah, look, we had not seen Lancelot prioritized at all up to this point. Lancelot now first pick in the SPL, and the Olympus Bolts, and I guess likely LASBRA are the ones who are going to be playing it. Realistic expectations here, Trilly. Do you think Lancelot has the framework to put a successful composition together?
You could definitely... I think Lancelot does bring a lot to the table, but if you are into a composition that can get him off his horse pretty consistently, a lot of his kit sort of falls by the wayside. So it really just depends on what the Titans draft into it. Is this going to be a damage Lancelot, or is it going to be in the solo lane? I've been liking... Haddix has played it a bit on his stream, and he goes this full tank Glad Shield Lancelot build, and that seems to give him some great success. But if this is LASBRA, the full damage Lancelot does have a little bit of issues into things that can get him off the horse. The stun from the Morrigan, for example, that's not going to be fun. If you can chase him down with this Nemesis, or 2 Nemesis in that situation, that's not going to be that fun either.
Charlie, they've got plenty of damage to dismount a Lancelot now. But again, a pick that has some flexibility here for the Olympus Bolts. Cabrakan does as well. Cabrakan was Haddix's pick in Game 3 against the Oni Warriors just last weekend. 4-3-13 is what he went. Jake tends to love the like CDR-type Guardians, spam the ultimates, find utility for your team in that way. But also made his name with the really aggressive in-your-face style W key picks. So definitely could be Cabrakan for Awesome Jake as well. One last pick for the Bolts here. Likely don't have either of their carries locked in yet unless something really crazy is happening. Hey, Shinto played Cabrakan mid.
Sure.
Now we do see the Cupid lock in for BaRRaCCuDDa. And Cupid has taken the league by storm, and BaRRaCCuDDa can deny it no longer. Gotta play it when it's as good as it is.
Yeah, I think the Cupid pick works extremely well, not only into that Chernobog like we talked about
And
at the
with
beginning,
Lancelot.
this Nemesis.
Double cripple fields, right? With Lance and
I mean, you could
Cupid?
make a pretty deadly just grouping with
Grouping,
the Cabrakan walls, with the Fields of Love and Lancelot just charging through, jousting in,
Right.
if you will. So I don't envy the situation that the Titans are in, but I think the Fields of Love is going to be great up into the Nemesis and the Cherno, so it's a good defensive ultimate if you are just worried about that Nemesis, diving you in that dual lane specifically, or you can just use it to counter out. Notably, the supports have not been picked yet. I mean, for the Titans, I should say. So I was going to say counter out the Guardian, but we haven't seen which Guardian is going to get through. Khepri hasn't even been looked at just yet. The Yemoja obviously being banned away, and it looks like the Bolts also will take away that Khepri. So Aror is going to have to dive deep into the God pool to try and find that one.
Yep, agreed. But what will Aror have to play? Won't be the Ymir or the Ganesh or the Khepri or the Yemoja. Khepri's been so highly prioritized and ends up not being looked at all in the first 6 picks here. So the supports take their lumps in the second ban phase, and both end up losing a bunch of picks. I'm sure they would have been very happy to play really on either side. Could see either support playing any of those 4.
I sense a battle
Bellona
approaching.
left open, and that maybe shines a bit more of a light here, Trelly. Be blown over in solo, Lancelot jungle, Cabrakan support potentially for the Bolts.
Yeah, I think that might have been a pivot, just seeing how many bans went towards the supports. There's like, you know what, just give Jake the Cabrakan, and we can pivot that way, or, it was always the plan from the start, just to bait out some of those bans, just in case the Titans weren't sure. But what they did do was ban out some of Auror's possible options in that support role. I mean, you're going 5-6 Guardians deep at this point and still trying to find some use. Notably, the Terra is available, but up into Cupid, not the best matchup. It's just one of those Guardians that has a decent time. We've seen some Sylvanas as of recently, but extremely immobile. You're pretty much forced into something like a Wingblade to try and get out of Fields of Love. I mean, I always look at this Cupid when you're looking at the support picks, because that's your lane opposition for the first couple minutes of the game. You're gonna have to worry about that ultimate when you are just trying to get online and try and get some gold under your belt. So it looks like the Titans are thinking about this one real hard, and for good reason.
Yeah, you need some tankiness for sure. And a lot of the good tanky initiators get taken away in that second ban phase. Not sure what they would love right now. I mean, you've got great AoE initiation from the Bolts. What can either fight into that, do it better, disengage from that? Atlas an option, and has been the solo lane
Is
option
that all?
for SOT.
I know you can do better.
Plus an Achilles. So maybe it's Atlas support here for Aror.
Yeah, I think the Atlas probably the best of the bunch, given the
best of the rest.
situation. It's still going to have a hard time into the Cupid, but if you are just not in that cripple field, you can help out your team. You can zoom them on out of there if you need some help. The ultimate is always going to be a great time if the Bolts group up for that gamma ray burst. They're all going to be getting their protection shredded, and that's always something that I imagine the Titans going to be looking for. They have the Nemesis as well, so they've got plenty of prod shred in that regard. And you can't count out the Morrigan. There's so many different transformations already on field. Given the situation, you can use that Lancelot ult if you really want to, or you can just stick with the double Nemesis combo. Double Chernobog is always going to make split pushing just miserable. You can always count on 2 Chernobogs coming in to stop you whenever you're looking for a tower, things like that. So the Bolts have their hands full with things they have to worry about looking at the opposition. Paul's transformations are definitely what I'm keeping my eye on.
And look, I've wanted to see this type of pick from Paul for a little while now, because it's been a lot of Hell, and Hell can do great damage.
Oh, yeah.
But also very utility-based. Cleanses, heals, things like that. ESET as well. ESET can do great damage, but feels like Spirit Ball, Circle Protection, great at utility, some burst damage, some burst healing. Morrigan is like, I'm going to run you down, I'm going to try to kill you, and Paul can carry on this type of pick as well. Saw a game of Hera, so it is kind of in an aggressive type vein. But up against now the Bolts draft, in one of the only other mids that has played played the Kukulkan outside of Ven is like maybe BMT. From time to time, BaRRaCCuDDa actually threw it out with an interesting build earlier on this phase. Was that what you were expecting, though, to finish off the draft here from the Bolts?
Yeah, if they were picking Ven's pick top 3, no way. I'm expecting the Cuckoo. But this late in the draft, this was honestly the only thing that came to my mind as to what Ven would want to play here, just because they have so much setup.
Yeah.
They've got a ton of CC. If Ven is just waiting for the rest of the team to go in, he should see some opportunity there to hit some massive Spear of the 9 wins. And you've got the best confirm on the map. Unless, of course, Paul turns into Cuckoo and steals it from you. That is going to be your main objective confirm throughout the game. So I think the Cuckoo's going to bring some lane pressure. You don't have to step up. You got slow immunity for the double Nemesis, so you're not going to worry too much about how many slows these Nems are throwing towards you, and you just have great damage. It really just depends on are you landing those abilities. We've seen Ven play this Cuckoo for a reason. He knows that his team can set up for him, and he's not going to be wasting too many of those ultimates.
Well, Charlie, now I'm curious, because it seems pretty clear, the Bolts' mindset, right? You're dropping some Cabrakan walls, you're ulting as Lancelot, Fields of Love, Eagles Rally, all that is just great at corralling targets. And then what's great at dealing damage to corral targets? The Spear of the 9 wins from Ven. How do you fight against that if you're the Titans? Are you trying to avoid the big team fight later in the game?
Oh yeah, you're trying to split apart the team fight. You've got double global presence, so you're using this Chernobog ult. You're saying, hey, someone come over and stop the split push. Okay, now we're flying in. We might both fly in. Paul and CycloneSpin, respectively, can both zoom in from wherever they are on the map, and at that point, it's a 5v4. Sure, you've got a lot of team fight presence, but you're down a man. So I think the Titans are going to use that to their advantage, try and get a gold lead using that split push, and then just pick apart the Bolts comp piece by piece and always fight with the man advantage. That's the idea. It doesn't always work that way, but going in, I'm pretty sure that's their mindset.
I want to sink our teeth a bit more into this matchup, and we will get the opportunity to do so. Quick break before Titans versus Bolts, game number 1. Appreciate the patience, everybody. Game number 1 between the Titans and the Bolts just around the corner. As a reminder, seems like the Bolts have themselves this big AoE teamfight style of composition where the Titans with the Morrigan and the Chernobog potentially able to split push and get some objectives done throughout the game. Pacing-wise, I think very important here, Trelly, as we do get a look back. And honestly, the Achilles, that last pick in here likely goes over to SOT over in the solo lane. Could be dynamic in finding some executes, chaining those together in these team fights. But really got to play around all of the AoE the Bolts have.
Yeah, you got to be picking your targets very well and obviously hitting that fatal strike. That's been sort of the topic of conversation whenever we're casting games like this.
Of course.
Is the Achilles actually landing those executes consistently on key targets on the, usually you're just, taking the front line or the first person in the fight. In this case, probably Jake or Haddix, and then just saying, like, let's get them down to a certain percent of HP, kill them, and then move on. Is that consistently happening? If so, you're getting the value out of that pick. And SOT, very mechanically gifted. I'm sure he's going to be just fine doing that. You're up against a lot of damage, though, as we highlighted. The Bolts have a pretty streamlined composition. We know what they're trying to go for. Will the Titans be able to pick them apart and split up the map enough to make this fight in their favor?
Now remember, both of these teams come into this set with a win in their back pocket. The Bolts just beat the Oni Warriors in 3 games last weekend, looked great in that set. And the Titans coming into this matchup on a 3-set win streak. So Paul talks about the Titans squad brushing off some of the trolliness, getting ready for Masters. It's exactly what the Titans have done here as of late. They've beaten their opponents 2-0 pretty consistently. A team that hasn't had a 3-game set since like early July. And so this Titans squad, maybe the hotter hand coming into this matchup, but standing's also super important here as well. Titans right behind the Bolts. Remember, the Bolts, an opportunity to take first away from the Camelot Kings if enough goes right, if the Bolts are able to find themselves victory. Ball's in their court for the Olympus Bolts. And look, they've got themselves a great team fighting style of composition, Trelly. And the Olympus Bolts, hopefully for them and their fans, can make it work. Game number 1 between the Bolts and the Titans. In we go.
Thank you so much, Dilson and Trelly. We get our final week of play in phase number 2, our second set of the day in that week with the Titans and the Bolts. It's J-Mac and Mifflin bringing you guys the action, and Doug on the spectator. And we get a couple of new looks out here. Specifically, we get Lancelot, first time available in the SPL, Mifflin, and took us until our second set of the game, or of the day, to finally get to see him. What are your thoughts on Lancelot right now?
You know, my thoughts are skewed because I'm a filthy casual player who's like, I don't know, low diamond in rank. So I don't really, I'm not a trendsetter anymore. I don't know what these new guys are really capable of. I have to see what the pros are doing. But from personal experience and what I've seen from streams, Lancelot seems to be an incredible early game bully. And he doesn't do it the same way as some of these other early game bullies like Osiris and Erlong Shen, where it's, hey, I can get in your face, I'm going to stick there, and I'm going to win the DPS trade because I've got enough mitigation, enough HP to work with. Lancelot is a tried and true assassin. It's, I'm going to roll through, I'm going to drop all of my kit, and I'm going to overkill you by 40%. And it seems like that maintains the case for, like, I don't know, the first 15 or so levels. And then in the late game, it gets to the point, for me personally, and from what I've seen, where Lancelot really struggles to finish off some of those kills. So I will tentatively say that keep your eyes on LASBRA, at least for the early to mid game. And then late game, I'm expecting this Lancelot to start falling off.
So do you think maybe that kind of changes up maybe the build path? Early game, go for a lot of that glass cannon, tactical nuke style of play, and then maybe as the late game transitions, we see him go more Bruiser-esque, get things maybe like a Glad Shield or pick up like Magi's or something like that.
I'm thinking throughout the early, you're wanting to boost your burst as most you can. So maybe Jotuns because you want that CDR available, so dependent on your abilities. Brawler's Beat Stick, of course. Hydra is a major core item on this god. Otherwise, I mean, Magi just seems to be really strong in general, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see that picked up.
2v2 at the totem. Layers finds a slow on LASBRA. Dashes in and cuts off his path. A second dash to cut the other option off, but maybe gone a little too far. LASBRA will get blink for blink to get away from Layers. No response from Paul to maybe go so, but SOT cuts off the upper path, and Layers picks up first blood.
Clean chase down potential. I love that cutoff from SOT, realizing that there's really one way out. And, well, if you're there, there's no way out for LASBRA. So the Olympus Bolts off to a bit of a rough start with their presumably early game jungle. Once he gets the Horus available to him, those situations are going to be much harder to come by. The Tartarus Titans catching them right before he hits that inflection point where the strength starts to ring true for Lancelot.
Now, one thing that we did see a little bit earlier on, it's been happening a little bit more frequently in the SPL, but we were talking so much about Lancelot, we kind of overgrazed it there, was the purple buff invade by the Olympus Bolts. We've been seeing this so many times as of recent. It's not like every single game or every single team is doing it, but we have been seeing it a little bit more often, Miff.
Yeah, I mean, just being able to strip away that buff, if your clear is strong enough, if you're able to reset yourself pretty easily, I think it's just a good call to keep at least someone guessing, right? Like, it just seems like the start in the SPL has been stagnant for so long that just these slight deviations are enough to catch these guys off guard.
Maybe a kill onto Aror, though he is still fairly tanky and will not be enough to follow up damage by Bear and Jake. Attempting yet another purple buff invade at this time will be stopped by Cyclone and Aror. And speaking of Aror, going with the sprint first relic, that's nothing out of the ordinary. But are we seeing a Pythax rush out of the support for the Titans?
Man, I'm not a massive fan of these high damage support builds. Like, I'll accept Chronos Pendant first slot, right? Like, the passive on Chronos Pendant is just ridiculous, and getting that CDR available to you is so important. I think I'm more okay with this lifesteal power start on Atlas in particular. We've seen recently what Atlas is capable of doing in the soul lane with a little bit of damage infusion, that power of burst, just so incredibly high. But you just got to think, like, Chronos Pendant's getting you pretty similar amounts of power plus CDR, and we know that that's a tried and true tested build. I think when you're going for something slightly more unorthodox like this tiny trinket start, you kind of got to make it work. You have to prove that it's actually viable.
I will say I'm ready for, I know we're 3.5 minutes in, so me asking for this early is a little crazy. I'm ready for the team fight stage, though, between these, because I want to see.
Right, that's crazy.
I want to see how Lancelot can do in these kind of 5v5s.
There's like one ult on the board right now.
Yeah, a single per, well, two now. Two.
Okay.
We got Haddix and LASBRA and Paul, so make that 3. Paul's level 6 right now. He's doing some power farming on this Morrigan. I don't think Layers has even come to his lane once.
Yeah, Layers has been, for the most part, farming up his own jungle, and he's going to be pretty good at that with the Golden Blade. And I suppose rotating to mid just doesn't feel great when Kukulkan's what you're walking into. Slow immunity and only slows for Nemesis means that if you're going mid, you're really just going for the wave.
We did see a small skirmish, but without level 5s on the jungler at that time. Not a whole lot of kill pressure. We'll see what LASBRA can do with this Lancelot. Still hasn't got that first full item online. Going into that Mace Tree, the Jotun's Wrath, as you mentioned, probably the go-to item for those cooldowns. LASBRA hasn't had the opportunity to really go back to base and spend up some of that extra gold yet. In fact, he might not even have enough gold in hand to be able to pick it up just yet.
Yeah, he's been accosted on the map pretty consistently. He's been trying his best, LASBRA, that is, to also not split too much with Ven, who's already at a slight disparity. Trying to match, I suppose, that presence that Layers has got. Just farm your own jungle, wait for that mid-game, wait for that point in the match where you can really start to pop off. I'm expecting LASBRA, the second he can finish that first item, and he's done so, heads back to base, gets that Jotuns. I want to see this Lancelot get involved. At this portion of the game, you bring a whole lot more to the 3v3, to the 2v2s than Nemesis will. So utilize that while you've got it.
Venenu's ultimate is down. Used it to clear out the wave just a moment ago, so it'll be a little bit of time before the mid laner has some big bursts. We do see a Scorpion invade by the Tartarus Titans, and they can go ahead and grab their own. So some of that neutral farm removed off the map, so that free golden XP that would have gone over to the Bolts has been stripped away by the Tartarus Titans. 5 minutes in, we're not seeing a whole lot of a lead, only about 300 gold up for the Titans so far. A pretty even game to start this one out. Only 1 kill on the board, too.
Yeah, so with the gold as even as it is, you got to say the Olympus Bolts are doing a really good job of controlling that neutral farm. First blood over to the Tartarus Titans means you'd expect them to have a bit more, but so far hasn't been the case.
Nice haircut, by the way. I don't know if anybody's mentioned on the camera yet, but
I think you're also having a really good hair day.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so
Just
much.
gas
out
each
there.
other up, I guess.
Yeah, no, we're just
not much to talk about with the game yet.
No, I mean, not a whole lot has happened. We had, what, a first blood at like level 2 go through into the jungle. That went over, at least over to the Tartarus Titans. That's where their small little bit of gold has at least started out for now. And Tartarus Titans, when it comes down to the team fighting in the late game stages, maybe kind of a little bit more pick-oriented, it seems their composition. Aurora on this Atlas can pick up 1, maybe 2 people. If he's really lucky, pick up the second person. But more often than not, it seems that one person that he grabs is the one that Titans are going to focus down.
Yeah, I think Trelly really highlighted it very well for the Tartarus Titans. Global presence, the name of the game. You want to split the map. Either have that Chernobog just sitting in one lane, split pushing, joining the team fight if you have to, and only if you have to. Or if someone does rotate over, all of a sudden you've got that double global presence. Have a Chernobog join your Chernobog, all of a sudden it's a 2v1.
Well, we got a 3v2 in the mid lane, at least for now. Paul's beads are gone off the pressure from the Olympus Bolts. So a little bit less safety for the mid laner for the next couple of minutes in the game. But Paul going for maybe a little bit less of an orthodox style of build on Morrigan. Typically we've been seeing more things like Doom Orb into just a little bit of extra CDR, but Warlock Staff the call for Paul.
A little bit of survivability, and you know, this is a build that I expected to see on Morrigan just because the majority of her damage in base stance as actually the Morrigan is melee range. Dark aspects, you got to get right in their face, so having a little bit more survivability to your name and some early penetration should boost your ability to get involved in these team fights. I still want to see the core items though. I mean, the Ob Shards, the Polynomicon, still incredibly strong on this pick. I do also like just seeing some CDR. Seems Ven's going back towards that double stack start where he goes Book of Thoth immediately into the Warlocks and really backloads the CDR in his build. That's going to make it a lot more difficult for this Kukulkan to get involved in the fights. It's going to make it a lot more difficult to actually want to use Spirit of the Nine Winds, whereas Paul with Sands of Time, sure, it's not a whole lot of CDR, but 10% can go a long way. All of a sudden, Changeling is becoming a much more viable option, even in smaller skirmishes.
Jake stealing away some offerings. Will stun out CycloneSpin, but Aurora is here. Paul right in the back. We'll make this a 3 versus 3. The walls will cut off CycloneSpin, and the sprint pop by Aurora. Pickup is good. We'll throw him right back to Cyclone, but the Field of Love been dropped by BaRRaCCuDDa. Good double mez, but Jake should go down here. CycloneSpin picks up the last auto, but now a blinking from Layers as BaRRaCCuDDa's in danger. Layers will pick up 1. Paul transforms into the Lancelot and gets a lot of damage through. Double kill for Layers, and the Tartarus Titans up 4-0.
LASBRA just a little bit late on that ultimate. You do get an HP shield as Lancelot once you channel the ultimate, but only once it's finished, once you're at the apex of that dash.
Oh, Lord, Venenu's health bar. Fighting back against Paul's. Ultimate just off the mark there. Otherwise, that could have been a nice kill for Venenu, a nice turnaround to get the bolts on the board. But for now, it'll just be the Titans with the kills.
And that's the Olympus Bolts getting over-aggressive, too. That whole fight starts because Jake says to himself, man, we're doing good on neutral farm, but that's the only thing we've got going for us, so maybe a couple offerings could help out, get a Trebuchet rolling, decides to try and steal away. That reveals you to the entirety of the map, and the Tartarus Titans with the amount of lockdown and rotation power that this composition has got, especially at this phase of the game. Jake got collapsed on almost immediately. The peel from BaRRaCCuDDa was good. That Fields of Love on 2 really slowed down that DPS. Jake lives for much longer than you would have expected, but that might have been a bit of a double-edged sword in that the Olympus Bolts got baited forward even further, opening up to an even cleaner trade for the Tartarus Titans. 4-0, 8 minutes in. It's a pretty good look.
And that does at least allow Paul to make that rotation in. We got to see our first little look at some of what Lancelot is capable of in a team fight. Unfortunately, it wasn't from the Lancelot itself. It was the Morrigan transforming into it. And do you think that's a good transformation target for Paul this early? I mean, we always talk about, you know, early targets. Your second ability is typically what you level on Morrigan. Do you think that's the call, at least a decent call for him to go for this early on?
Well, I need a little bit of answers from Doug before I can answer you.
Okay.
Doug, can we look at LASBRA's ability order? Because I know there's been a bit of a conversation on whether or not you want to max that 1 or the 2. Seems that LASBRA thinks the 1 is a bit better. It's a whole lot of DPS, incredibly high damage output. If you land your dash, you get a second one. So Paul's going to be maxing the 2 first, of course, which means he's getting skilled strikes, which is generally what I've decided that is my favorite thing to max on this god. It gives you a little bit of CC in that horse stance, gives you a whole lot of damage when you're on your 2 feet. So good transformation, blanket statement, yes. Any god that is early game, you probably want to be transforming into in the early game.
Well, we'll see how Paul can utilize the rest of his transformations. Haddix, near execute threshold, will jump out. Venenu throws out, nope, doesn't get much from it. Double pickup from Auror was good to zone things out, but Auror himself is low because Jake's got the wall to take him down. The bolts are on the board, but it's a 1-for-1 trade. Make that A 2-for-1 as CycloneSpin grabs another. Blink by Layers no good, and the Tartarus Titans can disengage to the gold.
Yeah, the Olympus Bolts are just getting so outpaced right now. Seems like the Tartarus Titans have always got the numbers advantage, and it seems that way because they do. That double global presence, of course, just so powerful in these team fights. But it hasn't let them too much of a lead.
Ultimate by BaRRa will just get him out of danger back to the tower. But it's yet another buff invade going the way of the Tartarus Titans. And the near 2,000 gold lead the Titans have amassed just 10 minutes in.
Yeah, Sot just getting a bit annoying on that speed buff. Anything to slow down LASBRA's farm, pretty impactful. Already a full level disparity, still trying to get some of that itemization available. Once that hi-rez is done, that is a whole lot of the damage output from Lancelot. I like to equate the piercing thrust, that first ability from Lancelot. It's very similar in execution to a Nem dash or an Achilles dash where you always want to auto-cancel between them. hi-rez is going to help you out with that DPS in those situations. Still a little while until he's able to finish that one up. On the other hand, though, a new-ish style of build, at least newly available since that mid-season patch for Layers. Heavy Executioner in second slot. I am a massive fan of this build on Nemesis. Just making sure that you're getting all that defense shred so early on. You only need the 2 auto attacks. And Nem's bread and butter combo is walk up, auto attack, instantly auto cancel it with your 3. There's your 2 auto attacks. You've already got the defense shred. Stack it with the defense shred in her kit. Doesn't matter who's standing in front of her. Layers is going to make anybody just thin paper in these team fights.
See if he can do it to Jake, who finds a double stun. Layers will dash in. The ultimate from Aror hits through
Good
Jake.
Lord.
A little bit more damage from CycloneSpin will take down the support for the Olympus Bolts, and the Tartarus Titans, with 7 kills to their name, 11.5 minutes in, go straight to the Pyromancer with no contest from the Bolts, will continue to push that lead.
Did you see how much damage Layers auto did there? That was 168 on the Awesome Jake with a full stack Thebes already. Tier 2 Prid win, and it's only 2 items on this Nemesis. Imagine what that's going to look like once he's got hi-rez for himself. Imagine what that looks like once there's a couple of more points in that ultimate. Layers' damage output already is a massive threat on the map. He has got insane burst.
BaRRaCCuDDa takes the tier 1 tower, but will he lose his life because of it? Finds the dash. Aror doesn't have his available. Sprint gets popped. Will dash into BaRRaCCuDDa, and he'll be as good as dead to CycloneSpin. LASBRA not going to stick
close.
around and almost lost his horse by losing out on that shield, but just a little bit of extra left there. Tartarus Titans capitalizing on the mistakes of the Bolts.
Yeah, so far the Bolts just haven't been the proactive element. When you look at their composition, you wouldn't expect them to be. Ven on the Kukulkan, very passive in mid. Haddix, for the most part, relegated to his lane. You've got a really high kill pressure dual lane, but they're a bit too far behind to be actually leveraging it.
Jake will get away thanks to the slow immunity built into his kit with that first ability. That might be the only reason he gets out. But with it, the Tartarus Titans can go straight to the Gold Fury and take that one also without contest. So 2 major neutral objectives have already gone the way of the Titans in just 13 minutes. And Miff, we don't really see Gold Furies this early anymore. Ever since the changes to it in the TTK in 9.5, it's kind of been defaulted to a little bit of a later objective. But now the position that the Bolts are in, with LASBRA being down 0-2, being down only a level, at least notably there, I mean, what's the path back in for the Bolts to kind of climb through this mid-game run?
I think it's around that duo lane. You got to hope that BaRRaCCuDDa is able to bring some of that fight, at least force out the ultimate from CycloneSpin. Jake is still playing a highly aggressive support pick with Cabrakan, can still catch out individual targets. No Phantom Shells just yet for the Tartarus Titans, so Aror, Paul to a certain extent, Layers, SOT, all very susceptible to that initiation. The main question mark for the Bolts is we haven't seen a Spear of the Nine Winds find value just yet, and where's LASBRA on the damage chart? I'm willing to bet pretty far down there. Hasn't been too involved in these team fights. Second to the bottom, right ahead of his own support. You got to see more from this jungler from the Bolts.
Cyclone dives to mid.
There it is.
There's that ultimate, but there's also a wall, so CycloneSpin will be fine. He'll be able to dash away, though losing quite a bit of damage, or a lot of health from Venenu. So we can see now how much damage Venenu can do. Only problem is there wasn't any other follow-up there besides just him.
No, but even just being able to maintain his own life is so powerful. That rotation from CycloneSpin had even found the TKO with the lead the Tartarus Titans have got. Could have even put some threat over towards that Fire Giant. Might be a byproduct of that Pythag start from Aror as well. A little bit of power, some lifesteal to everybody means that you're dealing a whole lot more DPS at this portion of the game than most people would expect. Opens up the door to those early objectives, like that Gold Fury that we had just seen. The Olympus Bolts are doing a good job of stagnating the pace of the game. You're starting to see some core power spikes landed. LASBRA does finish up that hi-rez. Ven gets his staff of Mirrodin. So couple of answers already starting to develop for the Olympus Bolts. The only concern is how slowly those developments are coming, because the gold lead has only continued to extend in favor of the Tartarus Titans, and it's not as if this composition from the Titans is going to fall off. To the contrary, I think it's only going to get stronger. This is a very good late-game comp.
It seemed like there was going to be a collapse onto Aror, who went over and stole one of the offering camps, but he only stuck around for just the one before immediately dashing away. So he's not going to stick around too much longer. Instead, we'll just go back and help out Paul. Level 12 starting to be hit across the board for everybody but Jake. So I'm interested as to where Aror will go with this second relic. We've been seeing a lot of the Bracer from this support more often than not. You think that might be the call for the Titans around these objectives?
I think it might be. If not Bracer, maybe you're just going for like a Frenzy or like a Belt or something like that. Just anything to boost your DPS. You're already on a composition that's so good at dealing with these neutral objectives. Layers and CycloneSpin will make short work of them on their own. Instead, though, Magic Shell pickup for Aror. I suppose if you're already having this much damage, you don't need too much more, and instead some survivability could go a long way.
And even upgrades his Heart Ward to its full glyph as well. The Amulet of the Stronghold now picked up, so some extra magical protections over to the way of Aror. But just kind of maybe not necessarily a little odd that you're trying to stack even more magical proc, because Venenu is really the only full magic damage on that team. Awesome Jake, though, does find a double stun, and that should be enough for him to get out, especially with Haddix standing by.
For sure.
But with now SOT coming over, and CycloneSpin as well, it'll be a turnaround kill onto Awesome Jake. The Tartarus Titans up 9-1.
Yeah, I think that Amulet of the Stronghold pickup for Aror is just a hard call out. LASBRA hasn't hit anybody. Haddix hasn't been in the game just yet. BaRRaCCuDDa, for the most part, doesn't even really have his itemization ready. So instead, who's the only threat? It's Ven. Yeah, I'll take a little bit more defense.
Well, Pyromancer once again to the Tartarus Titans. More gold in their pocket, and it's starting to get a little bit dangerous. We're only 17 minutes in, and we're looking at a near 5,000 gold lead for the Titans, a 7K XP as well. The Titans, from that very first blood that they have gotten, they have not let off the gas pedal and have only dropped 1 kill to the Olympus Bolts in that time frame.
Yeah, the Olympus Bolts have got to find some way back in. You got to draw your line in the sand eventually. So far, the Olympus Bolts have been stagnating the game. They've been slowing it down. It's generally a pacifist run from them. Seems like they're conflict adverse at every single one of these exchanges, for the most part just disengaging damage on the retreat rather than actually taking the fight. If you keep letting these neutral objectives go to the Tartarus Titans, I don't see a way back in for the Olympus Bolts. I want to see them defend this Fury. If the Tartarus Titans group there, I want to see the Bolts group there. If the Tartarus Titans are on the Fire Giant, I want to see the Bolts there. It doesn't matter where the Tartarus Titans group up, the Bolts have got to slow this bleeding down.
Because it's only getting worse as it goes. Shell upgraded immediately to Phantom Shell once Aror got enough gold in pocket to be able to do so. So fully upgraded Relic, at least one of them, for the Tartarus Titans support. And then that upgraded teleport as well for SOT, so he'll be able to get to any of these fights at any given opportunity. Aror in the middle of 4, gets caught out by the walls. Aror's not taking a whole lot of damage yet. Now that Sphere of the Night wins, should go down. Venenu gets the second kill for the Bolts. And Awesome Jake may go down right after. An up down from Haddix into the tower line, gets him to safety. And Paul gets pushed back. The Olympus Bolts find their 1 pick and don't drop a single.
Yeah, that's good for the Olympus Bolts. Not often that you're dropping like 5 ultimates onto a support, and I'm saying, yeah, good trade, but with the game at the pace that it has been, the Olympus Bolts, even in just finding that 1 pick, keep Aror dead for 30 seconds in time with the Oni Fury respawn. Maybe we see the Bolts pick that one up, close up a bit of that gap. I think if I'm the Olympus Bolts in this situation, it might even be just a desperation call. You gotta get this Fury.
Now SOT, the only one with an ultimate up on the board for either team. The Fury is being teased by the Bolts, but they haven't pulled it just yet. And look how far LASBRA is out. But he may be caught out. Does have that blink. Blink for blink. Reminisce that one all the way back to First Blood. But the Fury's still not pulled by the Bolts. They grab it, and now they're going to disengage, because look how far up Layers is by himself. Should go down here. The Heart Bomb will be enough damage to close that one out. BaRRaCCuDDa puts a 3rd one up for his team.
Yeah, Layers thinking to himself, I win this 1v1, surely. As long as I can make contact with LASBRA, it's gonna work out. It doesn't, because he steps too far forward and does not even touch LASBRA a single time. So the Olympus Bolts given yet another opportunity at a 5 versus 4 on the Fury.
Ult still up for SOT, now back up for Aror, who gets caught on another Fields of Love, another ult from Ven, and another death
Good Lord.
on the support of the Tartarus Titans. SOT now in the middle of 5, will not get out, it's body blocked by LASBRA. SOT goes down as well. The Olympus Bolts at a 5K deficit just moments ago have closed that up by 2,000 gold, and even more so with this Fury going down.
Man, the Tartarus Titans get picked once in mid. It's Aurora in mid, 5 ultimates onto the support, and the Olympus Bolts pressure the Gold Fury. Layers steps too far out. That's another pick. Another 5 versus 4 on the Fury. SOT gets picked out and Aurora immediately afterward. The Tartarus Titans never found equilibrium off of that first punchback from the Olympus Bolts, and the vast majority of their lead is lost immediately. A lot of the experience gaps have been closed up a good bit, even some places actually in favor of the Olympus Bolts. Haddix now 18 to the 17 of SOT. The Olympus Bolts have always been that team that have been capable of the counterpunch. Even since the Renegades day, it was, hey, make one mistake and we're going to make you pay, and you're going to pay a heavy toll, right? That's exactly what happens here yet again. Still, though, the Tartarus Titans have done a good job for the first 20 minutes establishing that lead for themselves. So even with this massive swing for the Bolts, you do have a slight buffer. But if the Bolts are able to do that from 5, 6K down, I got to think 2K down, they're probably liking their odds.
For sure. The Pyromancer on its way back in. We saw the Olympus Bolts finally step up. They drew their line in the sand at the Gold Fury twice, and then were able to get the Oni Fury themselves. Now, will that line be at the Pyromancer is the question. Tartarus Titans starting to group up. CycloneSpin heading over to the left, Paul in mid. Both of them can get to this fight very easily. But for the Olympus Bolts, do they wait for the Titans to try and pull one of these objectives and then punch back during that? Or should the Olympus Bolts be the ones to start up these objectives?
You know, the Bolts in the exchanges that they've won so far this game have all been off the back of massive commitments for individual picks. 5 ultimates onto a support if you have to. I want to see a bit of that. Sure, go ahead, pull the Pyromancer. Low risk, medium reward. Olympus Bolts able to secure that one for themselves. But as far as the actual Fire Giant itself, the only cooldown I'm concerned about for the Bolts is Ven's ult. If that's available, it's always going to be an option to look towards that objective. Trelly had brought up that it is the best secure on the map. The only thing that could challenge it from the Titans is if Paul turns into Ven. Otherwise, in a 5-on-5 engagement in neutral territory, especially in these jungle fights, when you've got guys like Paul who could just go invisible, and now with Polynomicon, one-shot one of your squishies, I think the Bolts need to look for that same win condition they had around the Gold Fury. Find your pick, put the Tartarus Titans on the back foot, and then look towards the objective.
Yeah, I just realized that Ven hasn't picked up his starter item yet. Now, we saw with BaRRaCCuDDa, one thing he would do was forego a starter until level 20 and then full buy a Bumba's Hammer. With some of the changes that Bumba's Hammer has had over the last couple of patches, do you think that's maybe the same route that Ven goes, or do you think he's just waiting for something else?
Bumba's Hammer nerfs not great, but still synergizes really well with Kukulkan's kit. It could be an answer, but there are a plethora of options.
Fire Giant, 30%, Fields of Love drop through an ultimate. Aurora will get away from that one by Ven. It's LASBRA in danger, uses the joust to get himself out of danger, but he's at critical HP. So is Awesome Jacob, blinking by SOT, finds a double stun, and a dive by Cyclone to the backline. Closes off the path for Awesome Jake, no escape left for the support of the Olympus Bolts, and the Titans find the first pick of the fight.
Still a 5-on-5, now 5-on-4 engagement. Ven's got me real concerned here. If he just gets stunned out, would probably lose out on those beads, but still able to put out a little bit of damage before disengaging. The Olympus Bolts just getting caught in these fights. Explicitly, it was LASBRA who gets dropped down to 20% before the engagement even starts proper. And by the time he had been forced to use his ultimate to retreat, space was lost. Awesome Jake was now the only one in the front line for the Olympus Bolts. And if there's only one target for the Tartarus Titans, doesn't matter who it is, defense shred is always there. Jake was removed with extreme prejudice.
Well, now with all ultimates offline, the Fire Giant, an easy call for the Tartarus Titans to go right towards. Haddix wants to steal this one away, and the Tartarus Titans will get the Fire Giant plus BaRRaCCuDDa, and maybe an additional prize of LASBRA, who stuck around too long in the back line. Cyclone picks up that one, and Haddix trying to run away. Does juke out the stun from Paul, but layers all the while in the back line, terrorizing Venenu and taking down yet another Bolt.
Jake might be dead. SOT's got the long flank. Layers should be able to strip away that defense, and Jake is just not tanky as long as this Nemesis is nearby. The Tartarus Titans show even when they are getting knocked down a little bit, if they stumble slightly in the mid game, once that 5-on-5 engagement starts up proper, their ability to chase out and refine their equilibrium certainly still there. 4-for-0 trade and Fire Giant to the Tartarus Titans, and a pretty simple call from here. 30 seconds to play with until Ven and Jake respawn. Tier 2 tower is not going too quick, so that might be the last stop for the Tartarus Titans on this side of the map. Head back to base, maybe move on over towards that Tier 1 and mid, back up to the Primal, spend all that gold, and the Tartarus Titans have reestablished and even pushed that lead further than what we had seen previously.
And just thinking about it, Myth, I mean, the craziest part about the lead that the Titans had established is that was all just neutral farm on the map, team fights and objectives, because those were the first 2 towers that the Titans took this game. I didn't
Well,
even
they were like 8-1.
I mean, yeah, I mean, they were up 8, 9-1 at one point, but the fact that they had a 5K gold lead without a single Tier 1 tower is just wild to think of.
You know, I think it was a double Pyromancer plus singular Fury over to the Tartarus Titans up until that point, but you're right, that they have been dictating the pace of this game majorly so far. Paul always makes me hold my breath when he goes invisible in situations like that. Thought for sure he was going to step up, maybe look for some of that poke. Could have been a fight back potential for the Olympus Bolts. From here, the Tartarus Titans, they could do one of 2 things. They could either have CycloneSpin play on the opposite side of the map of wherever the core 4 of the Titans decide to go, or they could just group up as 5 and leverage the fact that they've got a massive gold lead and a pretty decent experienced lead to boot. I think it is much more likely that we see the tried and true 5-on-5 engagement. Whether or not the Olympus Bolts are going to step up to these Tier 2 towers, TBD. I would like to see soft defense. Kukulkan just really good at keeping those minion waves out. It's not an enhanced Fire Giant just yet, so backdoor protections would really slow down the siege from the Tartarus Titans. But I don't want to see an overcommitment from the Olympus Bolts. If Jake's ultimate goes down or BaRRaCCuDDa's ultimate goes down and it's not immediately followed up by a kill, it's time to leave if you're on the Chaos team. Otherwise, the Tartarus Titans would love to take an exchange right after that.
So then if that's the case, you know, we do see at least a pretty nice defense over on the left T2. So we'll assume probably more towards the Phoenixes where we see these hard defenses. What's the call in for the Titans to try and kind of break into the base? Because as you mentioned, Kukulkan great at keeping these minion waves out, keeping players in general out. So what's the call for the Titans to try and break into the base?
You know, if I'm Aror, I'm thinking to myself, Jake's got no CC immunity, and if I pick him up, he's not going to have any defense either as long as Layers is nearby. So maybe you just try and take out the Cabrakan first. Otherwise, stripping beads and slow playing and utilizing Fire Giant for sustain is the classic boring answer, but it's the classic answer for a reason. It just works.
Startup at the Phoenix, Aurora at the front of it, along with SOT. But they're not going to go in towards it just yet. 30 seconds left on the Fire Giant buff. Seems the Tartarus Titans will take all of that gold they've earned, 4 towers worth, 2 T1s and 2 T2s worth of gold, and make their way back to base. I mean, you can see we were sitting at about 7,000 plus before that push started. Now we're sitting at an 11K gold lead the Tartarus Titans have up for themselves. A lot of big power spikes when they go back to base.
Yeah, you've already got a priority target on the map, a POI if you would. Pyromancer, easy group up for the Tartarus Titans. Doubt we see the Olympus Bolts step up there to try and put up a defense. I don't think the Olympus Bolts can allow the Fire Giant to go to the Tartarus Titans again. We might even see the Titans try and slow play it. It'll be about 29 some odd minutes in the game once it respawns. Give it 40 or so seconds and all of a sudden it's enhanced fire, and we'll make it much easier for either team to close gap and finish off this match. CycloneSpin ults left, but to who? Maybe you just get there right as the back is channeled by the Bolts.
Seems so. 14-5 on the kills. The Titans have been controlling the kill lead this entire game. At one point, sitting at an 8 or 9-1 lead over the Bolts, a 5K gold lead that did drop down a little bit. So we know that the Bolts do have some fight back in them. They've got some good gods to do it with. I mean, Cupid and Kukulkan, both great at being able to hit that one person that they need. So for the Bolts, who's that one person that they need to have picked out to try and find a punch back?
Any damage you do to Paul before he transforms is major, because every time he has transformed, it's been into a diver. Generally, it's been LASBRA on this Lancelot. If you're already at like 30% HP, you're probably not going to be diving, so targeting Paul, always a great option. If you could deal with CycloneSpin while that ultimate is down, of course, a pretty decent option as well. Otherwise, Layer's a bit slippery, SOT and Aurora standard front line, so you don't want to be putting all your damage there. Pyromancer to the Tartarus Titans, easily. But look at the ward state on the map. The Olympus Bolts have got a really good defensive line and still maintain 3 wards in pocket. Sure, the Tartarus Titans have got control of the pit itself, but all peripheral vision is in favor of the Olympus Bolts. Still one more sentry for Paul, so they could remove some of this priority vision, namely around this Greater Scorpion, I think. Going to be a very important choke point for the Olympus Bolts. I'm not so certain the Tartarus Titans are overly confident in their ability to coin toss with Ben on the map. Instead, they're just trying to generate threat and force the Bolts forward.
At least gotten Haddix and Jake for to pick up on Haddix. We'll get the beads, but BaRRaCCuDDa's already caught. Spirit of the Nine wins, slams to the back, and that's a great way for the Olympus Bolts to get back into this game. CycloneSpin has gone untouched throughout the remainder of this fight. SOT caught in the tremors and will not be taking down. A lot of healing going his way. One more hit, and it's from Venenu to bring the Olympus Bolts with a 1-for-3 trade. But with so many low health bars and a lot of ultimates down, they won't stick around for fire.
So you'd ask me, who do you want to put the damage on if you're on the Olympus Bolts? Ben landing an ultimate onto Layers and Paul, yeah, that's pretty good. That's a decent answer, I'd say. Removes them both from the map with one ability. The Tartarus Titans just group up a bit too much in that choke point, and the Olympus Bolts, a classic play all the way back from 2012, Spirit of the Nine wins, just absolutely crushes them. Now the Bolts 4 strong without their ADC, so it won't be the fastest burn. Have got the ability to pull the Fire Giant, but I'm not sure the Tartarus Titans or Aror will make it easy for them.
Aror is here. LASBRA's pelting him with ability after ability and will force this Atlas back, but CycloneSpin is here. And it'll still be a bit of a coin toss. Venenu's ultimate now back up, and that will be for sure the best secure on the map. Ultimate from Jake will at least get Cyclone to dive into the wall. Cyclone wants to get this, but maybe has stepped a little bit too far forward as LASBRA shuts him down, diving off the horse. Paul walks up, only to be pushed back against the wall himself. The Fire Giant has not been taken just yet. The Bolts do get it. They'll lose awesome Jake, but that's a trade the Bolts are willing to make unless they lose another one in LASBRA, who doesn't find the 1v1 against Paul.
So it's a two-man trade for the Fire Giant. Olympus Bolts make it out. Haddix, Ven, and BaRRaCCuDDa maintain the buff for themselves. LASBRA and Jake, I think, kind of forced into that position. The Tartarus Titans had bought so much time. Aror just showing presence around the Fire Giant pit, slowed down that DPS significantly from the Olympus Bolts, that LASBRA and Jake have to step up. They can't let anyone else in from the Tartarus Titans at risk of losing key targets from that buff, or even potentially the buff itself. So 3 strong with enhanced fire. The Olympus Bolts have got the potential to siege, especially considering Ben's got Poly. Should make short work of at least these tier 1 towers that are still standing. But the ability of the Olympus Bolts to actually look towards the Phoenix in an elongated siege fight has been severely hampered. You've got sustain from BaRRaCCuDDa. Those hearts can go a long way. And now that Death's Embrace is done for Haddix, he should be able to main tank some of these structures. But Jake's HP, not really going to be regenerating. LASBRA's damage output, which I'd brought up, generally starts to fall off in the late game. Without that Fire Giant really starting to fall off in the late game now, I think the Bolts might have to contend themselves with just maybe tier 1s and tier 2s. I wouldn't even be surprised if the Tartarus Titans might even start up the siege themselves.
So for the Olympus Bolts, as we start moving in a little bit later on, once these towers do go down, is their best option to then maybe find picks around maybe the next Fire Giant that spawns in, try and get your kills at that point in order to find the advantage? Or do you think that it's just going to take them till that next Fire Giant, maybe having that around everybody to try and be able to push into some of these Phoenixes?
I want to see the Bolts at least clean the map of towers. I think that is a very simple answer for them from this position, but you might be right. It depends on how quickly they are able to actually remove these structures. You got 2 minutes left with the Fire Giant buff, but Layers putting pressure on the left side of the map has distracted Haddix. Fortunately, Haddix does have access to that teleport, so should be able to rejoin his team if they continue that siege. Seems like the Bolts, though, do agree. They just want to go ahead and take out these towers, close up a bit of that gold gap. And as the game starts to go on, gold starts to mean less and less. Conversation now becoming around those relics and potentially some of these elixirs as well. Mostly the itemization done for both teams. Maybe just finishing up some of those tier 6 items on either side. So yeah, the Bolts slow play it here. Next Fire Giant, if it does go to the Bolts, should be a major push potential for them. So long as they can at least keep Fire Giant on Jake. It is deceptive how important that buff is on your supports. Just having someone who can confidently walk in is so major in these team fights. And I brought it up earlier, Haddix can tank the objectives, but once Haddix goes in, he's zoning with damage. He's zoning by getting in the face of CycloneSpin or getting in the face of layers and disarming. Doesn't really have that hard CC initiation besides the Eagles rally. Whereas if Jake were able to walk in, had he maintained Fire Giant for himself, he's walking in with multi-man stuns, walls, things of the like. So for now, the initiation of the Olympus Bolts, a bit hampered.
The Olympus Bolts will try and make their final bit of a clean sweep of the towers. Still one tier 2 standing in mid lane. The tier 2, at least in the duo lane, will go down. A push up towards the Phoenix. Aror and Paul not here just yet. Haddix will walk up and disarm CycloneSpin. Those poly shots from Ben are chunking away at the bird, but the ultimate has been dropped from Aror. That will force the disengage, maybe. One more auto is needed. Aegis is gone from Venenu, so are the beats. He is low in the backline, and Paul will dive right in. Spirit of the Nine Winds doesn't find the damage that he was looking for this time, and the Bolts are on full retreat. SOT to the backline, but the damage is just too much. Paul finds the pick on Jake, and Cyclone diving to the backline needs one more auto, but SOT will grab the kill away. LASBRA on the horse will disengage as far as he can, but it's not far enough as there are 4 Titans chasing him out.
LASBRA knocked off the horse and sent back to the Shadow Realm. The Olympus Bolts just overzealous in that siege on the left side. Phoenix had realized that, hey, they're not quite here just yet. Maybe we could take it out, and that maybe has become a definitely with BaRRaCCuDDa making the rotation, but it's a base race situation now. BaRRaCCuDDa needs to get back because I think the Tartarus Titans might just end from here.
It's 5 versus 2 and 25 seconds till. Jake is back, but BaRRaCCuDDa's back got stopped by the minions. That one should spell the end of the game for the Tartarus Titans. 1 Phoenix defense is all they needed to get back at the Olympus Bolts. Half HP on the Titan. Haddix in the middle of 5. BaRRaCCuDDa is back, but it is too little and too late. The Tartarus Titans take game 1.
Got to give props to the Olympus Bolts for keeping that game interesting. That was a major deficit they were playing into around that mid-game state. But that Phoenix siege was just a bit too sloppy for my liking. Ven stepping back up, trying to find that final hit on the Phoenix. Would have been awesome had he connected it. It would have at least taken off the bird, but what did it cost him? Costing him position, put him in the front line, and it cost him both of his relics as well. Answer's clear from the Tartarus Titans. Hey, that guy's got nothing left. Let's chase him down. And when you're all running the same direction, you're chasing everybody down. The Olympus Bolts so close to turning it around, but the Tartarus Titans demand perfection when you're sieging, and we didn't see that from the Bolts.
Not only did it cost Venenu his relics and then later on his life, it also cost BaRRaCCuDDa's time because BaRRaCCuDDa had to go back and kill the Phoenix, did so, and well, then into the game, Tartarus Titans march up the left side. They take game number 1, they take the Titan. We'll see if the Olympus Bolts can bounce back in game number 2 right after this.
Hey, wait, what did it win?
You win the respect.
You're telling me an alien wore this?
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, that was a good cut.
Messaging him to mute.
The best graphics you really need, Ultra, of course, and I can probably watch a stream on the side.
Content's gonna look good.
Pretty good, pretty good.
game number 1, the Tartarus Titans able to continue their hot streak here, 1 game away from a 4th consecutive 2-0 set win. Of course, all of the Titans and us here at the SPL powered by our friends over at Alienware, and you at home can be powered by Alienware as well. If you head on over to SMITEGame.com/Alienware and use code AWSMITE09 for discounts on select Alienware gear. If you want to play at the top of your game, you need top-of-the-line gear, and Alienware is exactly that. So thanks again to Alienware for not only powering us, but all of our players, production, everyone here at the SPL for Season 9. Happy to have you here, and happy to send those savings on to our viewers as well. My name is Dolson, and after game number 1, the Tartarus Titans, they look near unstoppable at points throughout this game. Bolts have that never-give-up attitude. Trelly keep things interesting. But ultimately, the lead too early, too often, too overwhelming, and the Titans able to take it.
Yeah, the Titans come out swinging, and at certain points it looked, like it was just a massive goal lead, and the Bolts could never amount to comeback.
Right.
But then, Venenu hits this massive Spear of the 9 wins at Fire Giant. The Bolts are able to go for that FG. They lose 2 in the process, but they confirm the Fire Giant. And at this point, I'm like, wait, the Bolts are in the driving position in this game right here. They go for this left side bird. All looks good. But unfortunately, the siege doesn't go so well, so the Bolts try to back out. But slowly but surely, everyone starts getting picked off. 2 Chernobogs fly in. They make this chase just miserable, and the Tartarus Titans, essentially just win off this play. I'm not going to say that it was completely just the siege. There was a little bit of question after the fact where BaRRaCCuDDa wraps around and goes for the 1 HP Phoenix. He tries to back. He gets his back stopped, even though just BaRRA and Haddix, I don't know if they're defending that anyways.
It's likely over anyway.
Yeah, it's likely over anyways, but still, just the LASBRA tries to lead the team north, try and keep them away from the Titan. It was just a little bit of a botched siege there, and I guess off the back of the Bolts getting pretty hyped up, but they actually sieged a bit of a comeback in this game.
Look, Paul put together a really nice game as well. Remember, when we were talking about Paul and his recent performances, had been a lot of the facilitator-style mids, obviously can deal some good damage. But yet another game here for Paul with super low death count. It was just so hard for the Olympus Bolts to hit that target. CycloneSpin looks great on the Chernobog as well. And it's just the 1 death for Paul. So now the trend continues. Paul has died once or not at all in the last 7 games that the Titans have played. The backline has just felt so safe. CycloneSpin has really been in there as well. And I was wondering, Charlie, where the Morrigan transformations would end up going. Seemed like Chernobog was a pretty popular option there. I think the Titans able to play around their strengths very well. Layers and Sot, in particular, impressed me early on.
Yeah, looking at the stat lines there, you wouldn't have guessed that the game was ever out of question for the Tartarus Titans. Again, just 1 real blunder, 1 massive play by Ven put them in a winning position, and the siege just didn't quite go as planned. And at that point, it's so hard to run away from the Phoenix when there's 2 Chernobog ults that can chase you down. Even if the Bolts were able to disengage, it wasn't going to be on the cards there. So the Tartarus Titans with a commanding lead, a little bit of a fumble, and then the hard finish, and that's what they were looking for, as you highlighted. This has been sort of the trend for the Tartarus Titans. 2 O's, everyone in their face, and they're off to a good start for this set.
They are, and look, Ven did some good damage, but it did feel like, that style of comp, you're leaning on Ven. You're hoping that Spirit of the 9 wins hits, because to your point, when it does, totally flips around the game regardless of how heavy the deficit is. When it doesn't hit, that's when the game can kind of push back against you, and it's unfortunately what happened to the Bolts here in Game 1. So, the MVP crown in need of a bounce back here to avoid falling in another set. There just hasn't been going in their favor. The Bolts, of course, will need that energy going into their matchup against the Camelot Kings later on this weekend. Titans making a really good case, Trelly, for a run towards the top of the table as well. And it's really these last couple of weeks where you have to say, what teams are playing the best going into Masters, what teams are looking the cleanest, most consistent. Honestly, the Kings have been right up there, or the Titans, rather, have been right up there with the Kings here in recent weeks. They're playing some very good Smite.
Yeah, we got to talk to Paul in that pregame interview, and he said, it's towards the ends of the phase. It's time to stop trolling, man. That's a quote. You can quote him. It's time to stop trolling, man.
Yep. It's always the Paul special to get his team right back on track. It's exactly what happened in Game 1. Game number 2 just around the corner between the Titans and the Bolts. I imagine we will see the Bolts leave I would assume the Bolts leave Dodgy open because, again, you'd love that for LASBRA, where I like the creativity of the Lancelot. Didn't quite hit what the Bolts were looking for in that game. But LASBRA just, that's the style of pick that'll get the Bolts right back on track. But I'm not sure that's something the Titans willing to let through.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. I probably think the Dodgy
Okay.
comes into ban, and then the Bolts have to decide, is Chernobog something that we want to take away, or will they just, you know, have the option to grab it for themselves? That, of course, leaves the Cupid option that BaRRa played last time. And it looks like the Bolts will just go with the Erlong Osiris, try and get rid of that early game pressure. LASBRA, of course, isn't going to get to play that signature Dodgy. The Lancelot wasn't, you know, it wasn't terrible, but I think the late game presence of that Lancelot certainly falls off. Full damage is also difficult to make worth. He's got some definite one-shot potential. It's just, you know, hard to hit confirm all of it.
Yemoja.
That does
Do
leave
not
open
forget.
Awesome Jake to grab that Yemoja, and that's a pick that he'll certainly enjoy taking. You know, he loves those ChronosPen and get the River's Rebuke as much as possible and just control the space for his team.
Yep, good look for Jake, where game one was not the best look on the Cabrakan, but the Titans don't mind the pick in general here, as the Cabrakan still remains popular. Now, is Jake lying down, or is the camera...
It's definitely the camera, but I like pretending that he's just laying there.
Here we go. It's revealed. And it does a whole 180, and in reality, Jake is hanging upside down.
Jake's
this
on his
entire
head.
time.
He's doing a headstand, just meditating before
That's
the
right.
match, trying to get
Wow.
his ults.
So, Trelly, the Titans taking a bit of a page out of the Bolts book here. Even though the Cabrakan and the Lancelot just suffered a pretty heavy defeat, the Titans may be trying to one-up the opposition. Now, it being the Titans, no guarantee those fall in the same roles that they just did.
Right.
But don't mind the picks themselves.
Yeah, I think that the Lancelot still does bring some early presence, and, you know, the Titans got to see it firsthand. It does do some crazy amounts of damage late game. If you're in a winning position, I think Lancelot's able to just run at carries, and if you're in a losing position, LASBRA still was able to get some good damage. It's just hard to get your engage when you're constantly getting knocked off the horse. It just feels like a big hindrance, so you got to make sure you're playing around that, and I imagine Layer's got a good look at that in that matchup, and, you know, we'll see if that Cabrakan goes over to SOT in the solo lane, and if Layers pilots this Lancelot, or if some more shenanigans ensue and, you know, the pick switch around.
Right.
But that does leave open the AMC Olorun double ADC composition for the Bolts off the back of a Yemoja. That's already looking extremely strong.
Now, Trelly, it feels like River's Rebuke plus Sanctified Field is one of the most potent
No one
ultimate
passes our
combinations to
grass.
lay on top of one another,
Oh,
where
yeah.
you're slowed if you're trying to leave one direction out of the River's Rebuke, and you literally can't leave out of the other side depending on what direction you're going. So again, the Bolts have what looks like a pretty good AoE style team fight building up here, and then AMC for spreading damage over that area. On the flip side, it looks like the Titans have some good aggression built up with the Morrigan now again for Paul. And already some transformation options. Could be a second Sanctified Field in some of these fights if that's what Paul wants.
Yeah, certainly could be. You could also get two Lancelots. You know, you get the horses in the back, I guess, and just joust on inward if you want to go for that. You could also just have there's so many different options. And again, whenever you grab the Morrigan this early on, it always puts the opposition in a difficult situation, because do I want to pick something that's going to give Paul some survivability, like an engage, something like that? It's got to be in the back of the Bolts' mind when looking at their jungler and solo lane respectively. We will see the Atlas locked in, so that does shine a little bit of light on the composition, sort of. We've seen SOT play the Atlas in solo as well as that Cabrakan in solo, but whenever I see the Atlas as well as another Guardian, I'm assuming that Aror will take that Atlas and then SOT will take the Cabrakan and just go for that Rangda's full damage style of build. It'll do well into the Olorun and the AMC. It really just depends on the matchup, who he's up against in that lane, and Haddix hasn't showed his hand just yet.
Hasn't yet, but Haddix is such a movement maker for this Bolt squad. Whether it's the King Arthur, the Bellona, Horus has frequently been something that Haddix leans back on, but changes the flow of a lot of the games for this Bolts team.
the crushing sands!
And Set. Now that's one to raise the eyebrows
You
here, Trelly.
dare
We have not
challenge
seen Set in a
divine
while.
rule.
Ends up being
Whoa.
Horus for Haddix. Horus plus Set
That's crazy. They're not friends.
on the same team. But Set is really the one we got to zoom in on here, Charlie. That is not a pick we have seen
Face the bitter
often, if
winds
at
of
all, here in Phase
Niflheim!
2 and really Season 9 in general.
Yeah, Set is one of those characters that it's just so difficult to make work. He has one of the hardest kits to actually use, and once you understand that kit, he can just be a hard carry for your team. Kingslayer, one of the most dynamic ultimates in the game, can be a complete game changer depending on how you use that skewer and the Set clones. I think it's got a good matchup into the Morrigan as well. You have a lot of AoE damage to try and reveal her, but you also gave Paul a pretty nice transformation. We've seen Paul play Set mid. We know that he knows how to pilot that Set. It's going to be some great dive, but Sanctified Fields is also going to be a bit of an issue. So I imagine anti-heal is still one of those things that LASBRA has to watch out for on this set, but it's definitely one of those hard carries. That's what this pick's going to bring.
Yeah, the Bolts have such a fun composition. The Titans do as well. I'm looking at the Atlas and the Cabrakan. I suppose there is some flexibility there because it's the Titans. You look at those two picks. Is there an obvious answer to the solo support roles in your mind, or do you think that's player dependent which way they want to go?
Yeah, I'm thinking the Atlas just goes support and the Cabrakan should be in solo, but I'm not going to say it's obvious given the picks. We know that SOT can build that hybrid style of Atlas and still find success, as well as just go full damage Cabrakan and also find that success. You are up against a Horus who's going to bring a ton of lockdown in that lane, and if LASBRA's there, Cabrakan doesn't have too much to try and escape that amount of CC that could be coming his way. So maybe not that full damage build we've seen, but still sort of hybrid on that Cabrakan as well.
Well, I'm curious because this Olorun was picked, I won't say early, I mean somewhat early on in the draft for the Bolts, first couple of rounds. Usually opens the door to being counterpicked a bit later on. Do you think the Titans have picked themselves a draft that can play around the Sanctified Field?
Yeah, I definitely think they have a fair bit of dive there. Depending on what Paul transforms into as well, I think you can make BaRRa's life pretty miserable on that Olorun. It really just depends on how that ultimate's used in the positioning. You know, Lancelot's CC immune for throughout the duration of his charge, so he should be able to get to that point. But if you're stuck in the middle of the Sanctified Fields after your ult, what are you doing in that case? So it really just depends on when BaRRa uses it in the fight and how he's able to spread it.
Tartarus Titans looking to continue their 2-0 win streak here. Game number 2 between the Titans and the Bolts kicking off.
Can the Olympus Bolts claw their way back and take us to a game number 3? Or the Tartarus Titans going to run away with a 2-0 over the number 2 seed? The Tartarus Titans taking a bit of a page out of the Bolts book this time around, picking up both the Cabrakan and the Lancelot. That didn't work out so well for the Bolts in game number 1. We'll see if the Titans can maybe get something started out here. It's J-Mac, Mifflin, and Doug back in game number 2 between these teams. And we also get Haddix's signature horse that he's been playing a lot of, but one thing we haven't been seeing very much of as of recent, Miff, has been the set that LASBRA's gone to.
Another feast or famine style of pick. I think a bit higher execution, but similar in play style to things like the Erlong Shen. Close gap, apply that slow, finish off with your auto attacks. Really dig in there once you start to channel that ultimate. So I think certainly a play style that LASBRA is no stranger to. I do want to highlight the Lancelot again. I know we didn't get to see it a whole lot last game. Looking a bit like a fraud on the cast right now, calling how he's an early game pick. Really can just dictate the pace of the match. And then you look up at 15 minutes and saw like 2K from LASBRA. I want to see Layers get active a bit earlier on. You've got some pretty decent targets, Ven in particular, pretty easy to lock down as Lancelot. That root when you're in the horse stance, very good against these immobile targets. Even BaRRaCCuDDa to a certain extent. Sure, Sanctified Field will make it difficult for Layers once he's inside of it, but CC immunity, that ultimate, means that you can kind of just like charge through it. I don't know, maybe some opportunities there as well.
We do see the junglers going 2 different paths as far as their early game is concerned. LASBRA coming to the mid lane with Venenu after clearing out the double buff. And once the second buffs got cleared over for the Titans, Layers has instead made his way in towards the right jungle, clearing out those XP camps for himself. And now setting up for this Totem of Coup, which has become kind of the #1 place for these junglers to go for that early 2v2.
Yeah, that fight's so important. Just getting timer on Totem, plus some MP5 and gold for the rest of your team goes a pretty long way. Generally, you'd expect Atlas to be lacking a bit in pressure at this portion of the game, but up against a Horus, I suppose, not feeling that pressure too much, but still want to make sure that it is going your way, and the Tartarus Titans will be collecting that Totem of Coup for themselves. I like the start difference, though. You brought up the slightly different jungle pathing. We see the age-old standard start from the Olympus Bolts, speed to red to wave, whereas the Tartarus Titans kind of do the inverse. That allows Layers to solo out all of his farm on the right side of the map and gives Paul solo waves. If you don't want to fight into the pressure composition of the Olympus Bolts, set plus AMC at level 1 and 2, That's one way to make sure that you're still farming efficiently and keeping your jungle on cooldown without giving any opportunity to the Bolts to leverage that early aggression. So the Tartarus Titans, very calculated in their pathing.
And it has allowed for Paul to get a very slight lead. You still see it sitting at 3-3, but Paul's been sitting there since before these waves had even met up. So slight advantage towards the early farm in the mid game for Paul. But we do see layers rotate in to get that level 3. Should give him access to the horse now if he decides to go with it. He does so. Now we'll see where layers can go on this god. See if maybe he can get some pressure on this blue buff that's respawning in now. 2 versus 2. Haddix low in HP though. Doesn't seem they really want to step up. Speaking of them, low in HP. Left side of the map, Aror falling down, almost falling down there, but SOT and Layers able to grab the blue buff and make their way out.
Just a bit too early on that skewer from LASBRA. It looked to me like Layers had held on to one of his auto attacks, jukes out, and LASBRA just helps out the burn there for the Tartarus Titans. Blue buff invade, I suppose you would expect to go the way of the Tartarus Titans. Again, that presence from the Lancelot should be outscaling Set at this portion of the match. I think only further evident by the fact that LASBRA doesn't even try and go for the return invade, despite Layers being pretty low on mana there. So the Olympus Bolts just taking a bit of a slower pace this early game, but still haven't seen that aggression from the Lancelot. Sure, it's been a blue buff invade, but that's about it. Now that he's got access to the horse, some of that CC, I really just want to see some rotations over towards Ven. I mean, it's not easy. Ven's got a plethora of avenues of removing Layers from that horse. Just swarm of bees at this portion of the match, or a stinger, and you're immediately off. Maybe even like 1 or 2 auto attacks, all it's going to take. But I just gotta think that Lancelot's got that chase down potential, and with the follow-up of Paul, changeling into Lancelot, 2 of them charging you down, massive cripple field on the center of the map, there are plenty of ways in to leverage that aggression.
I did just notice that Paul didn't go for a beads in his first relic slot. He went for Aegis instead. When you look across, the only real CC to maybe have to deal with would be when Awesome Jake comes over on that Yemoja. But then that kind of changes up maybe the dynamic of the question. We've been seeing a lot of multiple shells coming out. You're dealing with the Yemoja. Not really great tools to get away from Yemoja's walls on the side of the Tartarus Titans. So does that kind of force Aror, maybe even Cyclone, to be the one to have to pick up that shell? Thought maybe we were going to see something there from LASBRA, but a quick disengage from the Titans.
Well, I don't know that I would call it forcing, right? I mean, yeah, you're going to want a shell from at least one of those 2 people, but CycloneSpin's going shell like regardless of walls on the other side. Just really likes the ability to have additional HP, but still maintain your own DPS. Aegis, you're just standing there, you're damage immune, but you can't return damage. At least when you're channeling shell, similar in function to an Aegis, but you're not limited in what you're capable of doing. So to answer the question without being a weirdo and going on this huge tangent, yeah, I think they're probably going to get some shells.
Well, we'll see when those shells come out from the Tartarus Titans. An ultimate from SOT. He's been getting the better end of the pressure on Haddix in the solo lane. And, well, and once that Golden Blade comes online for Haddix, should at least make it a little bit easier for him to clear out. But we do see that's where at least a bit of a net worth disparity comes through. 600 gold up just in the solo lane alone. And that's where pretty much the entirety of the lead so far this early game has gone to the Tartarus Titans.
CycloneSpin could have been in some trouble, but Jake completely out of home, so walks himself right on out of there. Yeah, the Tartarus Titans right now have been doing such a good job of controlling all that neutral farm that I want to see the Olympus Bolts probably group up and take that fight soon. The 2v2 in mid, we haven't really seen the 3v3, but the 2v2 for the Olympus Bolts is really good. I mean, you don't have the hardest CC lockdown until Jake gets there, which is why you had said earlier, Paul goes towards that Aegis. But your DPS is ridiculous, isn't it? Set's the ability to burn on his own, very significant. With defense shred from Ven on this AMC, plus just the raw burst damage of a stinger, Paul would die pretty quickly, even with some decent transformation targets. I suppose the best in the early game being that Lancelot. That survivability is backloaded on the ultimate from Lancelot. You need to fully channel the dash before you get the HP shield. And the HP shield's not even that big right now. Maybe even some of the dot damage could be enough to remove it. So I want to see the Olympus Bolts get aggressive. I want to see both these teams really get aggressive. I think both of these drafts have got very good tools for this portion of the game.
Here's that first look at aggression. SOT stunned out and CC'd until he goes down. Awesome Jake picked up the first kill and picks up a double kill for himself as Layers got caught out stepping a little too far forward. The Olympus Bolts are the ones who put the first kills up on the board.
Yeah, SOT just walking a bit too aggressively in his pathing. The Olympus Bolts collapse on him easily. LASBRA tries his best to step up, put himself in a position where if the fight starts to look a little bit better, maybe SOT picks up 1 or 2 targets, you can turn around the engagement. Instead, SOT just dies way too quickly. That burn potential we were talking about earlier rears its head.
Sanctified field by BaRRaCCuDDa keep Aror away from one side. Walls, not enough orbs. Luckily, Venenu's got basic attacks. Transformation out of Paul, though, finds 3 people around here and a double joust in by Paul and Layers, a dunk in. But the damage isn't quite enough to take out Venenu just yet. It's a double kill for Layers, but it's also a double kill for Venenu, a 2-for-2 trade out in the mid.
So Ven now benefiting from a slight level lead, and off the back of that wild aggression from the Tartarus Titans, it is frantic, just really high octane combat when both of these Lancelots are on the map. That dash down, the chase potential so incredibly high, the DPS, I mean, those HP bars were moving so quickly, I couldn't have told you or predicted how that fight was going to end, considering the damage output we had seen from both Paul and Layers. But the Olympus Bolts, with good positioning and split engagement, you see one person walks away from the core of the group, allows Ven the space to return his own damage, was enough to keep it in favor of the Olympus Bolts, but not the entirety of the match. It's a bit more up in the air as far as which one of these two teams has actually got a lead.
At least for now, Tartarus Titans, who had that 600-700 gold lead earlier on, that gets mitigated by the first blood bounty, now only to about a 100. The lead is for the Bolts, at least in experience. You look over, at least in the jungle, it was a little while there for LASBRA. Duo lane is where like the main levels are now, as you look at Jake and BaRRaCCuDDa, both about a half level up over Aror and CycloneSpin. And now it's kind of our first taste of BaRRaCCuDDa joining a team fight with that sanctified field. Do you think that the Olympus Bolts now maybe trying to make some pressure over towards this Pyromancer, maybe make a rotation from BaRRaCCuDDa to get over there?
Yeah, hard to say. I mean, Olorun, you kind of want to leave in that lane, right? Like, let him cook up until he's level 20, you know, spend some time in the oven. Until then, maybe just trust the core 4 on the right-hand side of the map. And the Olympus Bolts are still capable of making plays towards that Pyromancer without their Olorun. That's afforded to them by having an ADC in mid, like Ven, on this AMC. But the lead not so massive, I think, that they can feel just confident in their ability to pull it out in the face of the Tartarus Titans. I think it's going to have to be a pick or some sort of separation first.
SOT will dash away. Haddix low in HP, no ultimate available to him. He used it earlier. Layers gets knocked off the horse, gets one push back. But Venenu finds the kill. SOT makes it a 1-for-1 trade, but the River's Rebuke will lock 2 inside and 1 out. Venenu will go down. Paul will find a kill onto LASBRA, and now it's just Jake to deal with 3 members of the Titans. But those walls are still there from Aror. Thoughts of Jake, absolutely nowhere to go, and it's Paul to put up the double, and 6 on the board for the Titans.
Jake almost killed Paul right there. I don't know if you noticed that. That stun, had it connected, likely would have been enough. Auto attack as well. Even Jake, when he's getting slammed by 4 dudes, is still looking for that winning line. Unfortunately for him, that winning line was not there for him. The Tartarus Titans, again, with just this highly mobile chase down potential, double Lancelot transformation, are able to keep the Olympus Bolts scattered and separated in these team fights. Each individual Lancelot putting out enough damage at this portion of the game to act as individual threats kind of affords the Tartarus Titans the option to not exactly play as a team and instead solo agent it.
This is not a fun 1v1 for Cyclone. He'll use the ult as soon as he lands, but without a knockout available to BaRRaCCuDDa, since he just used it, will allow CycloneSpin to be able to make his way out. But did trade out an ult for ult, but that's a much longer ult on BaRRaCCuDDa than Cyclone. And the Pyromancer started up by the Bolts because of the pressure they established on the left side. Objective will go to the Bolts, but the lead still remains for the Titans.
Yeah, Titans a bit late on their backs there. We saw SOT head back to base just as the Pyromancer had gotten pulled out, so no answer from the Tartarus Titans this time around. The Olympus Bolts able to sneak away with one of their objectives. But as you said, the Titans had played so well in these team fights up until this point that you're kind of allowing that objective to go down without falling too far behind yourselves. I'm thinking we're probably going to see some fights around this Gold Fury very shortly. Heimdallr has hit a massive power spike. Kinsai's already finished up. Ikavale done as well. It means that he is going to be very strong in these auto attack trades. Set and AMC going to struggle in that fight. Whereas this Olorun, on the other hand, sure, Telkine's Ring, a very massive pickup, but with Bancrofts in that first slot, your damage output is very contingent on your abilities with Olorun, and that's not exactly the position you want to be in. That second ability is going to be the bulk of the DPS from BaRRaCCuDDa, which means that it's just going to be easier to execute on the plan from the Tartarus Titans on the left side of the map.
Do see a group up of 3 Titans in the mid lane heading towards Gold Fury, but not going to fully group. Now with SOT here, maybe it's the Tartarus Titans who start at the Gold Fury, or maybe at least start a fight and see if they can grab an objective afterwards. SOT will dash himself on out of danger. Actually skipping upgrading the helmet that he picked up in that second slot after Breastplate. And Miff, we saw like 6 of these get picked up in the first set. What's up with this Mail of Renewal that suddenly seems to kind of just erupted out of nowhere?
Man, I wish I could tell you why these guys make the decisions that they do. I mean, just having some of that survivability, obviously very important. Being able to sustain in some of these team fights, I think maybe enough of a threat that could force some anti-heal pickups from the Olympus Bolts. But truthfully, I would just have to say like flavor of the week. Mail Renewal, I'm not certain how permanent this is going to be in the meta, but I'm liking how it really forces the Olympus Bolts, or forces whoever is playing into the Mail Renewal to really think about that passive, because the 15% HP regen can really shift up your DPS markers, can really make it difficult to secure some of these kills. So maybe it's a bit of, hey, you don't exactly know how to play against it just yet. Hasn't been around too often.
CycloneSpin fighting back in the 2v1. Not going to get a whole lot of damage through. Will slow down BaRRaCCuDDa. I don't think Cyclone wants to step any further than a halfway point in the lane, because LASBRA was waiting for him in the jungle. LASBRA will not stick around there very long, so Cyclone will be okay to free farm up. And he's gone towards that kind of early boxing style of build, this Iqbal first item. We haven't really got to see Cyclone utilize it too much just yet.
No, but once he does, that boxing going to be very strong. The only question mark is where's the sustain going to slot in? When I'd seen Bounce played originally, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, Iqbal and Offseat, that's standard. You know, we've seen that in a whole lot of metas. As of now, he's really just reliant on that Death's Toll. Could be we see CycloneSpin forego Lifesteal completely in the build and then wait for Death's Embrace as that sole source of healing. But I am very curious to see how he itemizes from here.
SOT pulls Haddix back. Haddix has the Protector Surge to dash back to his team. Greater Scorpion started by the Titans. Jake has a chance to steal this one away, but a pickup by SOT will say, who cares about the Scorpion? Let's go for the fight instead. Double joust in, but the walls will stop Jake from getting out. Haddix does not make it to the skies in time, and Layers will find the second kill of the fight. 2 more for the Tartarus Titans, maybe a third if Venenu steps too far forward.
Bro, I am telling you, this Lancelot is just dealing way too much damage already. Difference in the build, Layers as opposed to LASBRA goes still with the hi-rez in second slot, but Crusher in first slot, those auto cancels and auto attacks already dealing so much damage. CycloneSpin, though, could be in some trouble.
Venenu's beat's gone. BaRRaCCuDDa's ultimate dropped. And Aror trying to wheel his way around anywhere he can go, but now he's got the rest of the team to rally through. And LASBRA is erased. Venenu, no beads, no way, just means he's going to go right through the realms. BaRRaCCuDDa pelting auto as much as he can. They need one more hit. No, they don't even need that. CycloneSpin grabs one. BaRRaCCuDDa dash right through. And, well, there's the damage of a combo that Morrigan can bring to the table. A full, unofficial deicide for the Titans.
I was so ready to clown Layers for getting so desperate to get the last hit off that Heimdallr ultimate, but sticks around just long enough to bait BaRRaCCuDDa out of position, realizing that his cooldowns were coming back up, able to turn around that exchange. The Tartarus Titans have just turned into a raw DPS spearhead. This is a dive composition that is consistent with just squishies, right? Like, Aror, sure, tanky. SOT, sure, tanky, but they're not really making up the bulk of this dive. I'm seeing Paul and Layers involved in every single one of these fights. 4-2 and 6 for the actual Lancelot, 4-1 and 6 for the mid laner, and plenty of damage split between the two of them. Just feels like any time that Lancelot starts to channel that ultimate, the Olympus Bolts say, time to disengage, time to run away. Good luck outrunning a horse.
Yeah, it's not easy to get away from these Lancelots once they are into your backline. The Tartarus Titans, with this 11-kill spike that they've had in the first 16 minutes, have up their gold game to about a near 5K lead and get that closer towards 6K once we start getting this Pyromancer drop down, 5,300 up to them. And 9K experience, probably the more stifling one this early on. Look at the mid lane and look at the jungle. 3 levels separating both Layers and Paul from LASBRA and Ven.
So what will the Tartarus Titans do with this lead? Pyromancer off the map, Fire Giant's a bit too early in the game for that. Gold Fury, certainly an option for them, and with Trebuchet on this side of the map, should be able to establish some of that pressure. Look at the map state, Tartarus Titans, they're already en route. They want to fight now.
Awesome. Jake caught inside of the walls from Aror, but has a Riptide, but he's low on his Omi. Only one, maybe two available to his name by the time Layers gets there. The Horse will slow him down, but the Titans have established pressure against the support. Fury on the map and available. Tartarus Titans moving towards it.
They should be able to burn it pretty quickly. They've got eyes on Haddix in mid, but you never really know where Haddix is going to come from with that global presence and who's going to be coming with him. So now matched up with LASBRA, could be a threat on the map. Tartarus Titans showing a good deal of respect by not immediately pulling.
Oh, Haddix caught with one stun. Has to go
My
out.
God.
It's another double horse in from the Tartarus Titans. They don't find anything this time around, but that instant call from Layers and Paul to jump on in there and try and get that kill. Haddix is lucky he had that dash to get out.
He is lucky that he had an ally nearby, lucky where the minion wave was, but the Tartarus Titans do lose out on some significant tools there, both Layers and Paul without ultimates. Maybe you capitalize by catching out Jake.
Jake gets into the realms, will be stunned on landing, but again has Riptides to get out of the fight. Two of them this time around.
Oof.
And SOT just a little bit off the mark with being able to get to Jake. He's have to settle for an extra, but that's BaRRa's beads now burned.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to call that settling, you know? Like, you got BaRRaCCuDDa's beads. That might be more valuable than Jake's life right now. The Tartarus Titans have already put some pressure on the right side of the map. Layers takes out that tier 1 tower. Olympus Bolts still concerned about this Gold Fury, have been forced to group up, realize that Layers isn't here, they got to do something.
SOT has ult. Aurora has ult as well. We'll use it to wall off a few. The River's Rebuke, the Olympus Bolts get the Gold Fury, but can they get the fight after? The waves crash, and it's SOT, the first one out. Aurora and Cyclone doing their best to get the damage, but the wraparound from Paul will find a few. CycloneSpin takes down Jake. Aurora low. Venenu takes him down, but look at Layers who's come right into the backline. BaRRaCCuDDa's got to use his Aegis, and the joust in. Layers picks up a kill for his team to make it a 2 for 2, but he has stepped too far forward, and Haddix will punish him for it.
Had Layers got up to the air there, maybe there's some turnaround potential. It actually had the rotation in from CycloneSpin, but just there to bait in CycloneSpin. Double kill for Ven, and the Olympus Bolts get the objective and the team fight immediately afterward. Had Paul had access to the Changeling, maybe that exchange goes slightly more in favor of the Tartarus Titans, so good timing from the Olympus Bolts on when they wanted that fight.
Oh, Paul transforms, baits out the Aegis, and
Yikes.
a nice and easy combo for the mid laner to take down Venenu. So the Tartarus Titans now is a 4 for 2, I believe, trade. At the end of the day there, Gold Fury still went to the Olympus Bolts. They get the advantage there. And Mifflin, what's up with the Olympus Bolts being down 5,000 gold, but still being able to fight against the Tartarus Titans? This is 2 games in a row they've done this now.
But how long was that fight from the Olympus Bolts a 5 versus 3? We saw the long wraparound from Paul. Layers goes all the way through the Olympus Bolts green buff to join that fight. Sure, yes, the Olympus Bolts deserve credit for choosing when to take that engagement. They deserve credit for being able to win out on the fight once both Paul and Layers had gotten there. But I think that was an opportunity, again, afforded to the Bolts by the Tartarus Titans making slight errors in positioning. Had Layers been a little bit closer, had Paul not utilized that Changeling for nothing a little bit earlier on, I think the Olympus Bolts have zero opportunity to look towards that Gold Fury. But credit is due where it is, and the Olympus Bolts realize that that's not what the case is. Layers is on the right side of the map. Paul had already used Changeling. So this is our opportunity to fight. The Olympus Bolts have always been the counterpunch team, which means you got to know when, even from behind, you can fight in, and they choose their fights well.
Jake went with a Riptide to maybe see if he could find Paul in the jungle, but Paul had already wrapped himself back around to the tier 1 towers. So now is the opportunity for the Bolts to maybe try and be the aggressors. Pyromancer is up in just a few more seconds, and they could position themselves around it. Both the Hunters for these two teams are off to the left lane, so it would just be a 4 versus 4. I'm not sure you want Cyclone, at least if you're an Olympus Bolts player, to be joining this fight. Level 19 on the Heimdallr, and teetering close to that level 20 mark means massive power spikes available to the Titans Hunter just in a few moments.
Yeah, Odysseus Bow is going to really run havoc through the Olympus Bolts team fight. A lot of squishy targets where just those procs should be enough to make the Bolts consider the DPS of that item's passive on its own. Tartarus Titans, 4 stacked on the right, pull out the Pyromancer. Olympus Bolts seem a bit wary with their ability to take this engagement. Tartarus Titans just controlling the spacing. Wherever they move, the Olympus Bolts kind of move away. Look at all that space created just by the front line of the Titans. Pyromancer didn't need to be that simple, but it was. That threat just too massive.
Tartarus Titans continuing to now rebuild the gold lead, same as game 1. Go up 5K, lose a team fight, and then rebuild themselves. Now, it did get it to all the way up to around like 11K by the time the Fire Giant and Tower started falling down, so not quite to that same point just yet. And with the Olympus Bolts, in an instance of that case where, say, a 4v4 fight does break down, I mean, you're missing Sanctified Field. Do the Bolts still have enough to be able to fight back against Tartarus Titans in that case?
It's really up to Ven and LASBRA. Sanctified Field is down. Otherwise, you're really talking about BaRRaCCuDDa and his impact in some of these team fights. Ven's got the opportunity where either Lancelot, be it Paul or Lairs, kind of like rear up on the horse when they go into that ultimate stance. They're essentially standing still for about half a second. That's enough time for a Stinger to come through. That Stinger gonna stay with you, make it very difficult to remain involved in these team fights. LASBRA's DPS is getting pretty big as well. Transcendence done, Crusher finished. Looks like he's probably moving into like a Bloodforge in this next slot. I want to see the DPS core of Ven and LASBRA start to connect with that DPS squishy front line of the Tartarus Titans.
They're going to have to do it here because the Fire Giant has been started up by the Titans. It's only down to about half. Cyclone's the only one really pelting damage at it while Aror is zoning. Uses beads, throws down the walls, and all of this to try and keep the Bolts from getting into the Fire Giant. Sanctified Field is down. The Olympus Bolts have stolen the Fire Giant, but can they get out of the fight when there's 2 horses chasing him down? Paul and Lairs team up to take down Ven and LASBRA. Jake is low in HP. Haddix dove into the middle of 4, finds a big knockup, but that's not going to do anything more than delay him for another half a second. And a deicide in the wings for the Tartarus Titans. They grab Awesome Jake and put him in the coffin for a deicide.
Gotta give credit to Jake. That ultimate is what secures the Olympus Bolts. That Fire Giant just separates the Tartarus Titans. Nobody able to even put it into a coin toss situation. It's just BaRRaCCuDDa sinking in that damage. But the double-edged sword and downside of that is the Tartarus Titans almost seemed like they didn't care, didn't it? It seemed like they weren't concerned about the Fire Giant. They didn't try and work around the Yemoja ult, finish off the objective. Instead, they said, oh, you're here? You want to fight right now? You got the buff? We don't care. Anybody who stepped forward to try and secure it was immediately chased down. That double horse just so hard to escape from. And now, map state about where it would have been had they gotten the Fire Giant. Tartarus Titans take mid and right Phoenix, only one tier 2 tower, still standing. That's about as good as you could hope for from the Chaos team.
All 5 live for the Tartarus Titans. 2 tier 2s, maybe a tier 1 splash in there as well, and 2 Phoenixes. That 4K gold the Titans had spikes its way up to nearly 10,000 at this point through. The Olympus Bolts, I mean, they get the fire, and now they're looking at defending their one and only Phoenix. At that point, Mifflin, do you even wait for the fight at the Phoenix for the Bolts, or do you just try and push your luck against them in the jungle?
Man, jungle fights up against double horse doesn't feel great, does it? Maybe overlooked is the fact that once those jousting fields are created, those are also cripple fields. So Haddix takes a major hit to his efficacy. LASBRA not as effective in those team fights either. So jungle fights maybe not the answer, but when there's 2 of them, you're essentially locking down an entire lane as well. If I'm the Olympus Bolts, where am I taking this exchange? It might just have to be one of those Hail Mary jungle fights. I'm not saying they're favored there, but in a 5-on-5 on your Phoenix with fire minion waves leaking down the other 2 lanes, it's pretty long shot odds from the Olympus Bolts in this position. Yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult question to answer, right? Where are you going to pull your miracle out? I don't know, but I can tell you that it might just take a miracle.
We'll see if the Bolts can get that miracle play, because the Tartarus Titans have grouped up 4 to the left side tier 2, the last tower standing and the last lane with any kind of structure standing between the Titans and the Bolts Titan. Sanctified Field and the Rivers have been opened up, and Aror's the only one caught out inside of them. He'll go down to the Singer from Ven, and that's a great opening for the Olympus Bolts, but that ult from SOT will make sure that the Olympus Bolts don't step too far forward. Haddix and LASBRA in the backline have burned away SOT. That is a double kill for Venenu. The Tartarus Titans now on the retreat.
Just questionable initiation from Aror there, but maybe some turnaround call does so much.
The damage coming from this Morrigan is outrageous, but he had to use the transformation to get out. Layers doesn't have the same luxury. He walks right through the Riptide and into a wall. Venenu finds the unofficial triple, but the Bolts still fighting back.
Yeah, so that was a 5 versus 3 inside of the Tier 2 tower for the Olympus Bolts. I'm not certain that they were planning for that to happen, but if you could, that's about as good a plan as you could hope for. It's just Aror getting a bit too trigger happy with his initiation, sees BaRRaCCuDDa step forward to try and clear out the wave, wants to cancel that ability, does so, but no damage follow-up when both Layers and Paul are absent from the fight. So the Olympus Bolts now may be able to return a bird.
Willing to fight back, but with Cyclone and Aror, now Paul on the way, finds a stun against Venenu, finds the walls against Venenu, who will just sacrifice his life for the Phoenix, but he won't even get that. And look at the status of the base on the Olympus Bolts. 2 waves of fire minions make that, what, probably 3 or 4? That could just be game. Double stun will at least get some damage out there. But the Olympus Bolts, they at least get one person to come back alive to push up against the minions there. So LASBRA holds out, but for how much longer?
Still a full minute left on that Fire Giant respawn. 35 seconds left on Ven's respawn. Both Jake and BaRRaCCuDDa have yet to make their way back to base. I thought the Tartarus Titans would just go for the Tier 2 tower. Instead, maybe they want to look for the end. It wouldn't take a whole lot of damage to knock this one over, but the Olympus Bolts still 4 strong and only 15 seconds away from Ven respawning.
All ults aside from SOT, I guess on Aurora as well. Sanctified Field by BaRRa, and the Rivers will catch 3 inside. It's a good turnaround for the Bolts, but Haddix gets sent through the realms. LASBRA gets sent to the Shadow Realm, and Layers will pick up a double kill, an extra one for Cyclone in game number 2, and the set go to the Tartarus Titans.
Clean play from the Tartarus Titans in this one. I loved what we saw from the Olympus Bolts on base defense, realizing, hey, if this fight gets to our Titan, that's the game immediately. So they take the exchange in that awkward little corridor between the Phoenixes. Great placement of the Sanctified Field to keep the Tartarus Titans back. Better placement of the Rivers Rebuke, but still, with the deficit they were playing into and the numbers disadvantage, it was just too much for the Olympus Bolts to deal with, and the Tartarus Titans run over them.
I mean, it's unfortunate when you have that many well-placed Olorun Yemoja combos thrown into a team fight.
They were good.
And it's still not enough to be able to break through the defense and the damage that the Tartarus Titans put out there. We got to see what the Lancelot could do in this game. It definitely brought the damage, and then when you throw 2 of them on the field, a devastating combo for the Tartarus Titans to close out game number 2 and the set. That's it from us here on the cast. We'll throw it over to the desk to close it out.
Tartarus Titans keep their winning ways rolling now. 4 straight 2-0 victories for the Tartarus Titans in their sets. Get a good look at the Lancelot here in this one as well. And also the trend continues. The MVP of the previous week not doing so hot in continued sets now, Trelly. This Titans team starting to get into playoff tournament form.
Oh, yeah.
And they're looking scary to just about every team in the league.
Yeah, if Paul just, decided, hey, we're done trolling. If this is the Titans not trolling, I'm scared for, the future of anyone who's got to face them. The double Lancelot looked a little bit difficult to deal with, I won't lie. I was worried a little bit about, fighting into this Olorun ult, fighting into the Sanctified Fields. Turns out that the CC immune dash from the Lancelot, from Layers and Paul respectively, was enough to make sure to just run through these team fights and get a massive lead. And after the massive lead comes through, again, same style of in game number 1. A couple of falters where it looked like the Bolts were going to come back. But besides that, just non-stop aggression coming out from the Tartarus Titans.
Yeah, look, the Titan, and they're still able to maintain that creative identity, right? Just with the new picks, they end up sticking Sod on the Atlas over in solo, Aurora and Cabrakan over in duo, so you're able to get some aggression over on that side of the map while allowing CycloneSpin to scale up nicely over on the Heimdallr. And so I think that's so important for the Titans, where you're able to maintain some creativity, but you still play a really consistent and really strong brand of SMITE. I do think you have to give the Bolts some props. In back-to-back games now, they haven't made life entirely easy for the Titans. Even in huge deficits, able to bounce back a bit. This just looked like it was going to be the Titans' day, though. You get halfway through game 1, and then halfway through game 2, and you kind of know how these end.
Yeah, I do think the Bolts found some fight back, but you're right. After the gold lead is just looking so unfortunate. You're not getting, those Fire Giants as consistently as you would like. It just didn't seem like the Bolts really were able to do much. Even with stealing this one, stealing a Fire Giant in this game and confirming the Fire Giant in the game before, the Titans knew they had that gold deficit in their favor, and as long as they had the gold lead, the itemization lead, really just off the back of this double Lancelot composition, they were able to really turn the tides in their favor. Not even turn the tides. The tides were always in their favor.
They kept the tides flowing in that direction.
Right, even though
they stopped the tides from turning the other way.
Exactly. They built a dam and said,
That's
no,
right.
there will be no tides turning in this matchup.
Correct. And look, this is another game, notch another one for Paul with one single death. So now 8 individual games in a row for Paul out of the mid lane where he has died 0 or 1 times. And that's something we've looked for from the Titans. We've wanted to see more of that hyper damage, low death, Paul carry style of play, and we've seen that now in a few straight games for Paul. And the Tartarus Titans continue their winning ways. Layers was the spearhead of a lot of that here in this set, and now standing by with me for the post-game interview. Layers, we talked to Paul, I guess last week, we recorded the interview. Paul seemed to think, the only thing the team needed to do, recenter, quit the trolling a bit. You guys are now on a 4 straight win streak as far as your sets go, all of them 2-0s. Is it as simple as the trolling goes out the window and you get back to your winning ways, or do you think you guys have adjusted some things that have really been working?
I think we were trying stuff out early in the phase, and we kind of switched it up and we went back to our traditional just own everyone style, and that's what we're doing. So yeah, it's been really good for us.
I want to talk a bit about the Lancelot here in this set because I didn't expect to see it from LASBRA. It didn't quite work out for them in game 1. You guys do double Lancelot here in game 2. Walk me through it as a jungler. Is he more viable than maybe people are giving Lancelot credit for?
I was really surprised to not see him. I think he's very good.
Yeah.
Paired with the Morrigan, it's near unstoppable. So
Sure.
Double Lancelot running it down, big cripple fields, a lot of damage. So yeah, he's very good in my opinion.
Do you think compositionally that works against most anything, or did it really just make sense into what the Bolts drafted here in game 3? Or 2?
I just think you could just pick it whenever. I think he's just really strong. He's a new character, and he just does a lot, in my opinion, in the jungle. I think he's I think he's really good.
Well, look, the Titans, you always whip it into shape for tournament time. Do you think you guys are playing your best brand of SMITE now, final week of the phase?
Yeah, I think we're turning it up. We're getting ready for mid-season? I guess it's
Summer Masters.
Summer Masters, but it's
That's
mid-season, so yeah. We're just getting ready for that, and we're turning it up a little bit, so yeah.
Yeah, look, you guys are playing some great SMITE. Awesome to see. Congrats on your win. Looking forward to more of it.
All right, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Titans on a roll now, and Trelly. So it does seem like a combination of everything, recenter themselves, get the strategy back on track, but also continuing with the theory crafting, as I had mentioned. Layers may be surprised that we hadn't seen, well, I guess the one set earlier on today, the one opportunity, didn't quite see it. I imagine, because it's sets like this, and how many times have the Titans done this, where they play something unique, and then later on that weekend, we start to see it in other roles. Happened with the Robin earlier on, Ullr solo lane for Sod, it's happened a bit. Titans continuing to push the meta, change things up a bit as well. 2 sets today, 2 of them 2-0s. Now, here's the caveat, the extra twist, if you will. Normally, we do 2 games Friday, 2 games Saturday, 3 games on Sunday. Well, this week we have changed things up. We will have a triple header for you tomorrow that'll start at 11 a.m. Eastern time, as well as a triple header for you on Sunday, that also starting at 11 a.m. Eastern time. The J Dragons get the early ones. They're going to be here for our next 2 first sets of the day. And Trelly, tomorrow's the big one. Sanford Soccer on the Solar Scarabs is their jungler. They've swapped with the Dragons. Now Scream over with the Jade Dragons is their jungler. We saw great things from the Dragons earlier today. First matchup tomorrow, and the second between the Bolts and the Kings. Battle, trying to maintain some intrigue at the top of the standings. Lots of drama to be had on Saturday.
Yeah, and the Jade Dragons, obviously, we got to look at them today. They came out so explosive. Then we get to see that version of the Dragons facing the Titans on Sunday. That's going to be an exciting one as well. It's going to be interesting for the standings as we get to see the Titans.
Yeah, that's true.
Continue their trend of getting these dubs. The Bolts, obviously, would have loved to have had to win there, but the Titans, it looks like they're not being stopped by anyone, as you said. When Paul goes off into a game and dies once or 0 times, it just looks very difficult to try and stop that team. When the hand is hot, and right now, as you mentioned, it's the end of the phase, and that hand is extremely hot, it's difficult to stop this team and, keep them off their grind.
And so the Bolts only have 1 set remaining. The Kings with 2. Kings really still control their destiny as far as maintaining first seed. Could be some movement, though, between the Dragons and the Titans. So those standings, still very possible to shift up going into Masters. Remember, triple header tomorrow and Sunday, both tomorrow and Sunday starting at 11 a.m. Eastern time. But that's it for us here today. My name is Dolson. That's been Trelly. On behalf of us, all the other casters, everyone back in production, thanks for watching. We'll catch you tomorrow.